Queen of Light and Ashes. Mary E. Jung. Chapter 1. The Nation of Etruria. Third generation of kings. 8,000 years after the collision. Irrevocable darkness pursued Queen Mebe of Ravenna through the Blackwood Forest. Torrential rain obscured her vision as she pumped her legs to evade death. She covered her ears from a howling wind pushing against her momentum. Whiplashing branches from sentient blackwood trees added an extra obstacle to her escape. Her magic dwindled from the biological block on her body whenever a female became pregnant. She couldn't access the full scope of her light magic, which could fight off the darkness billowing through the ether. She could still use her ability to run at the speed of light to reach the edge of her kingdom. If only she had the raven shifters to tame the Blackwoods, but they had deserted Ravenna after her parents' deaths. Even though she was 4 months with child, Mebe's adrenaline and supernatural ability gave her the boost she needed to escape the Blackwood trees. Tentacle vines twisted toward her ankles, their vampiric teeth poised to gulp her blood. Mebe jumped and weaved around the vines, vaulting like a limber acrobat over roots that rolled up from the eroding earth. Monstrous blackwood trunks hissed and spit sap out their gaping maws. The sputum mixed with the gelatinous mud and sucked her feet into the ground. She dug into her power of light and extricated herself from the entrapment of earthen viscosity. She slid under a protruding root and charged for salvation. She lunged for the invisible mystic wall separating the kingdoms of Ravenna and Air. Blood vines wrapped around her ankles, nipped into her flesh, and yanked her backward, away from her only hope of survival. Mebe rolled to her stomach and clawed at the ground, desperate to prevent the blood vine's teeth from reaching higher. Roaring with all the power she possessed, Mebe ripped the serrated teeth from her body and screamed as they lacerated her flesh. Mebe pushed her matted damp hair aside and crawled back to the magic wall. She glanced behind, whispering pleas through her chapped lips. She begged for her life, the life of her child, and for once the universe to show her favor. The darkness was a hand's width away when she fell through the barrier. Mebe watched the darkness recoil when it touched the magic barrier and shrank back the way it came. She took a minute to revel in the feeling of liberation. She sat on the ground, inside the kingdom of air, and felt exhaustion overtake her moment of relief. The bright sun pierced her eyes as she lay back, winded from her death-defying escape. Coughing up mud and mucus, Mebe rolled to her side and inspected her wounds. Blood poured down her legs, and her ankle was swollen and purple, but she was alive. Her head flopped into the grass, and unconsciousness threatened to overwhelm her senses. Mebe's mind barely registered the sound of hooves approaching or the being bending to check her condition. The last thing she perceived were 6 dangling braids the color of fire. *******. King Rayhen of Yor couldn't believe he found Queen Mebe of Ravenna on the edge of his kingdom's border. No being could live past 2,000 years, or so he thought. Here she was, outliving 2 generations of Etruscan beings and at least 4,000 years old. He couldn't guess how she managed to circumnavigate the natural lifespan of all beings on Earth. But the last time he saw Queen Mebe, he was a child. 1,000 years passed since the day the kings voted to separate the 5 kingdoms of Etruria and imprisoned Queen Mebe. It was treason to let Queen Mebe into another Etruscan kingdom, and Air had already suffered for that folly once. His father had died trying to save her from imprisonment and was labeled a traitor, then murdered with bog-root poison. Rayhen had lived with dishonor among the other kings of Etruria and the noble council of Air since he took the crown 1,000 years ago. Rayhen couldn't risk the other kings finding out he housed a fugitive royal, but part of him also wanted to know what happened during the 2nd generation of kings. He had one ace up his sleeve, and if he thought she had died, then the other 4 kingdoms may believe that also. Rayhen just had to keep her hidden in air, and no one would know the treaty was broken. Queen Meeb gasped and coughed up a mouthful of sludge. "Help me." Her eyes were still closed, her words were barely coherent. Mercy moved his heart to reconsider the laws of the treaty binding every kingdom, never to open the magic barriers, never let Queen Meeb beyond her borders of Ravenna, and no one was ever to step foot in her kingdom. Rayhen covered her with his jacket but didn't know where to take her. There were too many eyes and even more gossiping tongues at the Emerald Castle at the capital of Air. Air was the second hated kingdom in Etruria, Ravenna taking the number 1 spot. Handing over a traitorous queen would win back the favor lost when King Cecilida, Rayhen's father, stood against the second generation of Etruscan kings to save Queen Meeb. The noble council of Air might use this opportunity to gain political leverage with the other kingdoms. Etruria was a mess, but Air was in utter chaos because of being marked traitors. Rayhen had to play his politics well or lose his crown and title forever. He examined Ravenna from his side of the border for other survivors. She had broken through a magic barrier that was supposed to keep her contained. Only water, dirt, and buildings remained, indicating that he would have to heal the queen if he wanted answers. Rayhen had no idea what caused her kingdom's destruction. There was a menacing feeling in the atmosphere, and he suspected Queen Meeb was the cause. Either way, he required her confidence, so he would take her to his private estate and wait for her to awaken. Chapter 2. A pounding headache roused Meeb. She rubbed her temples to ease the pressure around her skull and opened her eyes. She expected the sky to be her first view, but instead, there was a canopy of paisley taffeta. Meeb rolled her head on the pillows to investigate her surroundings. Her body was heavy from sleep and difficult to maneuver out of her position in the mattress. The curtains around the bed were drawn closed, and she couldn't tell if anyone else was in the room. She managed to prop herself up on her elbows and used the pillows to keep herself upright. Meeb took stock of her condition as she leaned against the headboard. She was stiff and sore, but most of her wounds had healed thanks to her rapid healing ability. She was relieved to find her illusionary power was still concealing the pregnancy. The darkness hadn't followed her into Air, but she would puzzle that enigma later. She wasn't clapped in irons, so for now, she was safe. Meeb wasn't sure how long that would last now that she had regained consciousness. Breaching the barrier was a violation of the treaty the 5 kingdoms of Etruria had signed. She amended that her scornful ex-husband, Ananias II, king of Desiree, had signed the treaty in her name, then waved it in front of her face. If the darkness killed him, Meeb would call it a blessing. She was isolated during her marriage. Her ex-husband and the 5 staff members in Blackwood Castle encompassed her social interactions. She had been chained to the bedpost like a pet, and even animals had better treatment. A backlog of social anxiety and emotional insecurity developed after years of being sedated and tormented. Only one king had stood in her defense at the ambush that resulted in her imprisonment. King Cecilida of Yor. She didn't know what became of her friend, but his bravery would forever remain in her heart. Meeb had broken through the barrier somehow. Maybe Cecilida opened it. Opening the bed's expensive crimson curtains, Meeb surveyed the empty room. It was a royal suite furnished with silk chairs, oak furniture, and a small library in the back. It was like the guest chambers in her castle, but with Aryan green and gold state colors instead of Ravenna's black and red colors. She spied a bathing chamber in the far right corner and, forgetting everything else, threw back the covers in desperation. Every muscle ached with agonizing acuteness when she rolled out of bed and placed her feet on the floor. Her body protested. The state of her condition, her joints cracking and popping when she stood. The world spun as her knees buckled under her worn-out legs. Her eyes took a minute to focus beyond the continued pounding in her head. Her face alternated hot and cold as sweat broke over her body. She was on the cusp of vomiting, and her bladder was close to exploding. Taking a deep breath, Meeb pushed herself up and weaved her way to the other side of the room. After 4 months of convincing herself to escape her tyrannical ex-husband, Meeb chose to plead one more time with the kings of Etruria for clemency. After caring for her needs, she returned to the bedroom and bit a nail in thought. She wasn't guarded inside the room, but that didn't mean someone wasn't outside. It was risky assuming Cecilida hadn't been seized during her imprisonment as well, but air was her only ally. It was run for the next kingdom and prayed Cecilida was still king of air or die with the darkness. Meeb stuck her head out the window to determine an alternate exit if Cecilida wasn't her rescuer. Rolling green hills stretched for miles. Flowering meadows and cool breezes drifted through the window. Emerald trees and enchanted foliage beckoned the eye. Beyond the lush emerald forest, she saw the caramel, red, and yellow woods significant to Air's perpetual autumn ecology. Pulling her head inside, Meeb headed to the door with renewed hope that her friend had opened the barrier and saved her life. Her hand had barely wrapped around the door handle when it pulled from the outside. Meeb jumped back as a handsome male stood in the doorway. He was a striking being with broad shoulders and hair the color of fire. 3 tiny dangling braids at his right and left temples swung as he assessed her. He towered over her, which wasn't surprising given her petite stature, but this was like facing a beast in the forest. Meeb tried to puzzle why Cecilida would send someone in his stead. He couldn't be his son Rayhen, he was just coming of age. He could be a god, except he was dressed in green and gold like Air's royal court. He wasn't brandishing a sword, nor did he have chains or a written decree, so Meeb allowed a small semblance of patience to filter her judgment. She wasn't trusting of males, but she had an unborn child to think of, and the only exit was through the being on the threshold. "Excuse me," Meeb adjusted her stance to get a better view. "Are you here to take me to see King Cecilida?" The being with irises the color of the Air's autumn forest did not budge. He did not speak. He assessed her, dropping his chin, so their gazes met. "Can you take me to the king, please?" Meeb tried to hide her urgency, but panic was rising the more protracted the being's silence concreted. "Do you mean my father?" His voice was deep and crisp. Meeb felt the blood drain from her face as a horrifying revelation transpired. She found herself searching his gaze as if to read his mind, but she didn't have that power. She hung on the word father and registered his identity. He was Cecilida's son, Rayhen. "What year is it?" Her lungs wheezed in trepidation at how Rayhen would answer. His tone was flat and haunted, creating a sick feeling in her stomach. "The 3rd generation of kings now sit on the thrones." Meeb fell to her knees, unable to register the pain as she hit the floor. The shock nearly stopped her heart. Her breathing became ragged as she considered how long she had been locked in her castle. Indeed, someone would have noticed she was missing for 1,000 years. She hadn't realized how long she was held captive because Ananias kept her mind in a perpetual state of herb-induced apathy. "Where is Cecilida?" Meeb knew it was a long shot to assume he'd be alive, but Etruscans sometimes lived a few hundred years after their 2000th birthday. Rayhen crouched down, and 3 beaded braids at each temple swung deliberately. One large braid was elaborately woven from the front of his forehead down to the nape of his neck, giving him a savage effect. He was labeled a traitor and died from bog-root poisoning the day you were captured, Rayhen explained with bitterness. Meeba's mind became a whirlwind of emotions. Cecilida was her only true friend, and those greedy kings murdered him. He wasn't a traitor. Her ex-husband and the kings of Riverfold and Xerxes belonged in that category. They staged the coup that separated the 5 kingdoms and locked her away. Grief clawed her soul to shreds as her avenging cry pierced the atmosphere. The air stirred and crackled with electricity. Light emanated from her body like a quasar bursting from a black hole. A mystical wind fanned her hair around her shoulders as her power intensified from her emotions. Rayhen jumped back with a curse and shielded his body with a wall of hard air. She felt his power lock in place and watched as the static currents of her storm never touched his being. His skin turned an odd shade of tan and his hair changed into fire as he protected himself from her power. She would have taken the entire house down, but her power dissipated. Meeb screamed and pounded the floor with her fists, beseeching the universe to bring her justice. Her body crumbled into a heap of tears as the stress from the darkness, her friend's death, and the impending doom from the other kings became overwhelming. His mouth opened as an expression of astonishment overtook his features. Sun above. What was that? She coughed around her tormented emotions. Cecilida was my friend. He tried to protect me from the other kings. Rayhen inched over to Meeb and helped her to stand. I'll get Aeth. She's better at this stuff than I am. Meeb turned and sat on the edge of the bed while processing her grief. Rayhen departed, and she again wondered if she was about to be placed in manacles then put on trial for breaching the treaty. The door swung open, and a robust woman with oak-colored hair stepped into the room. A few maids followed with food and a basket of herbs. Pardon me, Your Majesty. I brought food. His Majesty asked me to care for you. I'm the royal madam of this house. My name is Aeth. She curtsied in respect then directed the maids to attend their duties. Thank you. Meeb slid off the bed and came to a table where food was being set, along with dishes and silverware. Platters of smoked fish, salted pork, roasted potatoes, carrots, and all manner of fruits were laid out on a small table. The smells turned her ravenous. She took a seat and lifted a serving spoon to arrange meat and vegetables on her plate. She moaned in ecstasy as a forkful of pork hit her tongue, and juices ran down her throat. The fruits smelled like heavenly nectar, the vegetables tasted of the earth, and with every bite, Meeb felt her strength grow. Her senses heightened because of her pregnancy, and although she was unable to eat more than a few bites of bread a day during her first trimester, it resolved at week 17. She had about 19 weeks until the baby was due. In 10 weeks, she would enter her magic siphoning cycle. Special nurses trained to assist mothers when their baby began to develop its magical identity. Some mothers died because their baby took too much power, so siphoning nurses were trained to balance baby and mother. Meeb couldn't ask for siphoning nurses because they would become alerted to her pregnancy. Rayhen might be willing to give a queen refuge, but her baby posed a political threat. It was the first child to combine 2 kingdoms in Etruria together. Etruria was a patriarchal civilization and did not have the chance to marry female rulers until Meeb took the throne for Ravenna. Desiree, where her horrible ex-husband used to rule, would try to claim her child for their throne. She needed to keep her baby a secret until she knew Rayhen was trustworthy. She was 4 months pregnant, her womb still small. It wouldn't be hard to hide her condition. AF headed to a closet in the back of the bedroom and came out again with an outfit. She set out a rose-colored tunic and buckskin pants, then rummaged through the closet for a pair of shoes. Meeb ran a hand over the tunic and admired the lace overlay. Like everything else in the room, it was elegant and feminine. It held the imprint of timeless love. A beautiful aura filled Meeb with serenity. She would typically require a dress, but the original owner was taller from the outfit's look. She could roll the pants, and the tunic was long enough to hang down to her knees. The tunic is made of Lady of the Valley silk. Lady of the Valley silk was made from Ravenna butterflies, which lived in Ravenna near the Butterfly Falls. They were the size of 7 grown beings and could produce enough silk to clothe a kingdom. Lady of the Valley silk was named after the maidens who harvested, spun, and wove the silk. It was the pride of Meeba's kingdom. Her precious butterflies were now extinct because of the darkness. It wiped out every living thing in her kingdom. Meeb had ridden the butterflies every day before her marriage to Ananias, her ex-husband and king of Desiree. The freedom of flying had always cleared her head and gave her peace. There was nothing to compare to the rushing winds and crisp feel of the world as she soared above it all. The serenity of watching the earth as she flew never ceased to amaze Meeb. The pollinated scent of the butterflies enchanted her senses with every flutter of their wings. "Thank you, Af." Meeb choked back her sorrow. Everything she loved was gone. She was queen in name, but her soul felt like a beggar. She pulled the tunic over her head, and the silk felt like wisps of air as it slid over her skin. "We don't have the kind of weavers you are used to, Your Majesty, but we can have gowns made for you in a few days," Af said and adjusted the neckline of the pink tunic. "Thank you. I'm grateful for the king's kindness. Her Majesty, the late Queen Winid of Yor, owned the clothes in this room. His Majesty is showing you great respect to give them to you. Is this the royal suite in the castle then?" Af shook her head no. This was Queen Winid's private chamber at the royal house. It was strange King Rayhen had not brought her to Emerald Castle. Meeb had an odd feeling, and she wanted to confirm if King Rayhen had seen the pregnancy or not. "Af, will you ask the other ladies to clear away the food?" Af ordered the maids to clean the table and leave the room. When they were alone, Meeb asked, "Did you see the pregnancy?" "Your Majesty. When you were brought to the bedroom, you were near death. It's a miracle you recovered with only a few bruises. Your body had a moment where the magic gave out. The pregnancy was revealed only to me." Meeb considered Af's words and clamped down on her fear. "Have you told King Rayhen? My loyalty is to my king first. However, I will not put you or the child in danger." "Thank you. I appreciate your discretion." Af curtsied. "It is not for me to inform His Majesty on your affairs, Your Majesty. All the same, I'm thankful you didn't say anything. I'm not used to people giving me kindness, so it has significant meaning to me when people show their better side." Af cleaned up the rest of the room and turned to leave. "His Majesty is a good being. If you give him a chance, you might make a worthy ally." Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Rayhen entered his room and rubbed his face, ghosted by the aftermath of Queen Meeba's explosion. No one with ill intent could have made the sound that came from Queen Meeba's throat. Something foul had occurred during the second generation of kings, and Rayhen started to question the truth he believed since he became the ruler of Air. He based all his information on his father's dying confession and the witnesses of the kings present during Queen Meeba's capture. Rayhen pushed off the door frame, stood up, and paced his room in ponderous agitation. He remembered the day his father died as if it had occurred yesterday. King Cecilida was poisoned by the other kings and labeled a traitor because he had sided with Ravenna over a territory dispute. As one of the strongest earth wielders, his father was immune to most harmful substances, but Bogrut was the universal exception. Rayhen had stood there, unable to believe his father was dying. Cecilida took Rayhen in his arms and gave him the crown of heir. He told him to rule the kingdom fair and to love the Aryan people. His mother sobbed as his father sputtered and gargled on his words. Poison wasn't a pretty way to go, and it was branded in Rayhen's memory for eternity. Rayhen had barely lived 500 years. An adolescent, he hadn't understood his father's last decree. He didn't know what to do about his grieving mother. Soon after, Rayhen's mother died of a broken heart. The other kings tried to seize Yor after his mother's passing, proclaiming Rayhen too young and unfit to rule. He kept his crown and title by reminding the other kings that Etruscan law stated the eldest child, or sole heir, received the crown after the death of the kingdom's current rulers. There were no exceptions. Unless they were going to vote for another law to be passed and reconstruct Etruscan policies on royal elections, they had to let him rule. The kings of the second generation spent the next 500 years creating difficulties for Rayhen. He returned his thoughts to Queen Mebe and her miraculous appearance. Rayhen hadn't expected to be so affected by the sheer magnitude of Queen Mebe's presence. He felt the air electrify around her being. Her curly hair blew around her shoulders as her magnetic energy made his skin prickle. Her pewter gaze had turned white so that her irises and pupils disappeared. Her power of light had been mesmerizing, and it created a sense of intense resonance inside his being. Rayhen felt a profound connection to Queen Mebe, but he didn't understand why. Something called to him from the fabric of the universe, insisting his earth magic merge with her light. He never felt anything akin to the sensation of his soul vibrating with Queen Mebe's, as if there was perfect balance between their powers. He peered out the window and gazed out at his kingdom. "What have you gotten me into, Queen Mebe?" Chapter 3. A staff member informed Mebe that Aof would return to guide her to dinner with King Rayhen. She wasn't sure how she felt about a meal alone with Rayhen. Parts of her royal education started to resurface, like muscle memory, but she hadn't practiced social decorum in 2,000 years. Her chest felt tight, and her palms sweat, thinking of how to converse with a strange being, what protocols to use while eating, and how she would keep from freaking out over the broken treaty agreement. She was a hot mess, Mebe knew that, but she was willing to try to be civilized. She looked in the vanity over the dresser and cringed over her appearance. She hadn't washed, and her stench was enough to kill an elephant. She padded to the bathroom to make herself presentable. Mebe stepped into the warm, herbal-infused bath water and moaned at the sublime heat. Basil, lavender, and thyme tickled her nose as she inhaled deeply. The smell was refreshing and invigorating, and the medicinal water needed her tense muscles. Mebe noticed potted plants arranged like a forest scene inside the chamber and admired the intricate details of autumn inspiration. A small waterfall splashed over a rock wall where she could rinse and massage her shoulders. It flowed into the basin, with candles peeking through the stone crevices. The lights around the bath gave the impression of fairies flittering among rocks while the water serenaded the atmosphere. She loved the canopy of ferns decorating the perimeter of the room and vases of flowers wafting sweet fragrance. She turned to the gilded mirror on the wall and watched the water slide off her skin. There were still bruises, but they would disappear in a few days. The wounds on her legs were now scratches and pink outlines from the blood vines. Teeth. Her hair was a mess of tangles, the curse of curls, and required oil treatment. Meeb turned and released the illusion over her womb. She loved the enlargement of her belly, how it curved like an egg and made her feel wondrous. Her eyes looked like an imperial storm rolling in from the moors. The color was the same as her father's and always warmed her memories. Meeb turned from the mirror and finished her bath. After drying with a fluffy towel, she left the bathing chamber and rummaged around the closet for something to wear for dinner, but every gown was too long and tight around her bust. She cloaked her pregnancy and pulled the rope for Af to come to her wardrobe rescue. A few minutes later, Af arrived and found a beautiful seafoam green gown. After 30 minutes of pinning, tucking, and adjusting, Meeb was satisfactorily presentable for dinner. Af led her out of the room, and they hastened down the halls. Vases of ferns scattered about the corridors. The house was full of earthy smells like evergreen, sage, and mums. Every turn had a large crystal window with lace curtains blowing in the breeze. It was so peaceful here. Cecilida must have put his heart into designing this place. There was so much love in the air that it felt imprinted on the foundation and mortar. She had never met his wife, but Cecilida had spoken of her often. Walking through the halls, she finally glimpsed the intimate world he had kept hidden. They stood before a double oak door with gold handles shaped like an open book. Af knocked and announced their arrival. No time to collect herself then. Stepping aside for Meeb, Af let her enter, then closed the door. Stepping farther into the room, Meeb found herself in a small candle-lit library with a balcony. The floor-to-ceiling windows were open, revealing beautiful gardens silhouetted by the setting sun. Amber curtains fluttered with the evening wind as Meeb turned in a circle. The library wound up to a domed mural, and the walls were shelved from floor to ceiling with volumes edged in gold. "Welcome, Queen Meeb," a deep male voice rumbled from the balcony. Meeb jumped and spun around like a top, making herself dizzy. "Sun above. You walk like a cat. I nearly threw up my heart." Rayhen raised an eyebrow and strolled into the room. "That would have been messy. Do me a favor and keep hold of it until after dinner." She appreciated his humor, it helped ease the tension in her body, and she took a minute to observe his appearance. His emerald jacket and brown pants accentuated his hair's copper and brick hues. The beautiful strands sparked with red and gold against the candlelight, reminding her of embers. All the while, those mesmerizing emerald and gold eyes watched her every move. He was compelling like an autumn bonfire to a storyteller. "Queen Meeb, please take a seat." She blinked, and her attention turned to the table in the corner set for two. Meeb sat down in a puff of skirts and settled in for dinner. "I prefer Meeb. I never enforced the honorifics with Cecilida. It's okay to use my given name." Rayhen raised his eyebrows at her brazen disregard for social etiquette, but the upward curve of his lips betrayed his amusement. "Very well. You may call me Rayhen." That sort of traditional slap will make King Xarius' head explode. "I should try it on him." King Xarius. Meeb had no idea which barbarian now sat on each throne. All the kings she knew would have died of old age. Rayhen took a sip of wine before explaining. "King Xarius of Xerxes. Thinks the world of himself." Meeb remembered her encounters with his father, Darian. Like father, like son. Rayhen looked about, then cleared his throat and gestured to the platters. "I hope you like the food." "Thank you. It looks delicious." She felt her anxiety start to fade as the conversation with Rayhen encouraged familiarity and comfort. Meeb. I need some information from you. Rayhen leaned forward as if his words were of great importance. What do you want to know? She basked in the herbs and butter of the potato she popped into her mouth as she listened. I would like to know why you were imprisoned and what happened to your kingdom. She wiped her mouth then set down her fork. Didn't Cecilida tell you why I was captured? Rayhen shook his head no. He was dying when he passed the crown to me. No one knows what happened that day. The other kings never explained why they created the magic barriers. On the day I was captured, the kings of the other Etruscan nations called for an assembly at the Chamber of the Five Kings. We began discussing an expansion of trade with Wang Yong's empire, and while we were voting, King Darian surrounded the table with his guards. My wrists were shackled with manacles, and I was forced from the chamber. All I could hear was Cecilida advocating for my release. Ananias followed the guards to Blackwood Castle, where he took control over my capture. He sent Xerxes' guards away, and then he boasted about a plan he developed with King Darian of Xerxes and King Mavias of Riverfold. He intended to betray Xerxes and Riverfold by returning to Desiree, gathering his army and navy, then marching through Etruria. He knew he couldn't kill me because I told him about my regenerative powers during our courtship. I asked him why he bothered to marry me if he planned to rule all 5 kingdoms. He said he wasn't finished with me and would return after taking over Etruria. He left me to wait for the incoming war, but he unexpectedly returned to notify me that the barriers locked him inside Ravenna's borders. The kings of Xerxes and Riverfold betrayed Ananias, and that's how the 5 kingdoms became separated. Ananias II doesn't sound like a good king or being. She lifted her gaze to meet his steady emerald and gold stare. No, he isn't. His magic is the essence of manipulation, and he tricked me into believing he could help me. Help you how? How did he trick you? By marrying Ananias, I would combine resources, have more votes on my side for Etruscan policies, and the other kings would have to show me respect as his wife. I'd been struggling with getting the other kings to accept me as a female in power. Marrying Ananias seemed like a good idea at the time. Of course, you still have to possess a crown, a kingdom, and resources to remain in a political marriage. All of that annulled when he used the darkness to destroy my kingdom and attempt my murder. There's nothing left to connect Desiree and Ravenna. There was more to the story, but Meeb wasn't going to expose her personal life, nor her baby, to a stranger. Her first duty was to the child and its safety. When she felt comfortable with Rayhen, she would share the rest of her past. That's true. Etruscan law states that a queen must hold a title before she is married to an Etruscan king, keep a trade channel open with her mother country, and renounce her nationality. I never gave up my title as Queen of Ravenna. Ananias never gave up his title as King of Desiree either. He came to live in my kingdom, but he still held power as King of Desiree. What a strange marriage. Technically it wasn't even a completed marriage by your description. Calling Ananias her husband became a habit of keeping up appearances. It wasn't. We were a political arrangement that benefited both parties. I had a ceremony for show, but there was no paperwork. Ananias II wanted to maintain power in his kingdom, and I didn't want to give up mine, so we cut many corners. And the other kings were okay with that arrangement. He sat back and dropped his hands to his knees. His eyes widened at the scandalous proceedings of her marriage. They didn't know. It's not a requirement to prove you are married if both parties agree. Besides, they saw the ceremony, and there was no reason to doubt what we told them. It sounds complicated. Complicated was an understated explanation for what happened between her and Ananias II. It was doomed from the start, but I needed help getting the other kings to listen to my ideas. It seemed like marriage would solve all my problems. What of the magic that destroyed your kingdom? I only saw a black cloud disappear when I arrived at our borders. She exhaled and clenched her fists as memories from her escape flashed through her mind. The darkness is anti-life power that has plagued me for many years. 3 months ago, it was no longer capable of feeding off my magic. I've been planning my escape, and I finally had the chance yesterday. I made it to the stables and was halfway across my kingdom on horseback before Ananias took control of the darkness and sent it to kill me. The horse didn't make it, but I could use my power of light speed to make it to the border of air. I have no idea if Ananias survived the darkness or not. Rayhen picked up his fork, a signal that he finished his inquiry. I think our dinner might get cold if we don't attend to it. Why don't we finish eating and walk around the gardens? You can tell me more about the darkness. Meeb was exhausted from her explanation, but Rayhen hadn't given her a reason to believe she was in danger. A walk will be nice. Thank you. She finished her meal then asked to be excused to use the bathroom. Rayhen used a bell system to signal he required assistance in the cozy library. Meeb followed the attendant down a narrow hall and used the facilities. She returned to the library, where the helper curtsied and departed. Meeb did not see Rayhen as she stepped into the circular space of the room. She glanced at the balcony windows and recognized the silhouette of his frame by a marble railing. Under the watchful eye of the moon, he appeared magical, as if birthed from the same ancient power that radiated in her veins. Something ignited inside her that bellowed he was her salvation. Where that strange voice came from, she didn't know, but it plucked a trusting melody that lured her toward Rayhen. She stepped forward, and the click of her wooden heels against the marble platform triggered his awareness of her approach. "Shall we?" he asked and straightened from his position over the railing. Rayhen outstretched his hand in gentle offering like a petal suspended on a breeze. Her fingers caressed his palm, and he slipped her hand into the crook of his arm. Meeb kept her eyes forward, afraid to show any vulnerability. The last male she touched had been Ananias, but this sensation was new and acceptable. Rayhen wasn't hurting her and kept his contact within the limits of Etruscan etiquette. She relaxed her shoulders and peered around her at the torch-lit scenery. Tall crystal torches lit the walkway, and little streams wound about like webs. The smell of flowers and herbs tickled her nose as they strolled over the gravel. Sparkling glass balls winked in between hedgerows while night creatures rustled the leaves. Rich, deep soil accompanied the orchestra of scents as they turned down a bend edged with mums. The soft breeze kissed her neck and fluttered her hair mischievously. Rayhen led them to the first platform of the upper level of the Tid Garden. Meeb stopped to gaze at the wide-open space of yore beyond the house. Rolling hills and shadowed trees brushed against the evening canvas. Fountains trickled with tranquil waters while flowers swayed in the crisp fresh air. "This is beautiful. I'd love to see everything during the day." She looked up to see his expression while Rayhen turned toward her breathless compliment. His answer was brisk but reassuring. "Of course. I can bring you here tomorrow afternoon if you wish. If there is a tomorrow." Rayhen continued their stroll, steering them around a circular cobblestone walkway and back toward the house. "Do you have any idea how we can stop the darkness? My power of light might be able to stop it, but I currently have a damper on my magic." His eyebrows creased together. "Why can't you wield your light?" The light could conquer darkness, but carrying a child blocked her powers, and she was useless until she gave birth. "I'm still recovering from my escape. It didn't pass the barrier, and it didn't take anything inanimate. Perhaps the magic keeping the kingdoms separated is strong enough to keep the darkness from entering as well. Hopefully. I'll take you back to your room and send for you tomorrow morning. We can start looking for answers in the library. My father collected all sorts of rare books. Perhaps one of them has information on how to defeat the darkness. Until tomorrow." She didn't know if she would sleep, her memories of the darkness still raw. She had candlelight to keep her from fearing the night, but the sense that the darkness was waiting to pass through the barriers felt like a palpable omen. Chapter 4. Meeb sat on the windowsill and gazed out at the land of air. She opened the sash to let fresh air and morning sun create a new mood in her room. Her foremost thought was to protect her child and find a way to fight the darkness until her power came back. The power to command light was rare. Meeb didn't know where to begin. Searching for someone to help fight the darkness. She could send letters of inquiry to her family on the Aquarian Islands, but that would cause more complications. Her family didn't know she was alive. On her 1000th birthday, Meeb had been ready to receive her crown to become the next queen of Ravenna. Without warning, she combusted, turned to dust, and scattered into the atmosphere, then returned to her solid form. When she became coherent from being brought back to life, she noticed the castle was empty of the attending beings for her coronation. Dust floated through the throne room, and she realized everyone had been killed in the blast, including her parents. She was made queen by default, and in her distress, she failed to recognize the darkness came through the dimensions with her and attached itself to her being. She tried to rid herself of the darkness, but it became a plague that ate away her power and being. She became a slave to the darkness, and it had been impossible to remember her true nature of light most days. Meeb was desperate to survive, and that was how she wound up married to Ananias II. Ananias controlled when she ate, who she spoke to, where she traveled, and kept her confined to their bedchamber during her marriage. She was a prisoner even before the other kings staged her capture. Meeb shook her head to dispel her thoughts haunting her from the past. She grabbed a rough map of the house that she requested from Aof while she ate breakfast and headed for the hallway. She didn't want to sit alone with her thoughts, and researching the magic origins of Etruria was a good distraction. The green and gold Aryan motifs stenciled into the house's woodwork provided a serene ambience as she traveled the house. She glanced at family paintings on the wall, stopping to admire one painted of Cecilida then continuing. When she reached the main library on the first floor of the estate, Meeb felt a familiarity settle into her being. Cecilida loved books. He was an avid reader and collected anything that caught his interest. This piece of his life brought back all the precious memories she experienced with Cecilida. After discovering his death, she needed a bright spot. Meeb could feel Cecilida's spirit in the glinting windows, the smooth wooden floors, and the walls of maps inside his library. She could imagine him sprawled in one of the window seats, feasting on a mountain of books. She ran her hands over the spines of the tomes as she walked, conjuring the sound of fluttering pages. When she reached the library index book, Meeb exhaled at the monumental task of divining which subjects to research. The index book was an alphabetical list of every piece of paper, volume, and record in the library. She would have to go through every word she could associate with ant life, magic and darkness to find relevant books, but there was no other way to go about it. She didn't know what caused the darkness when it was attached to her being, and she didn't have any enlightenment now that it was gone. An hour later, Meeb was ready to throw the damn index book out the window. She had tried every word and phrase to lead to the books she needed, but the subject of the darkness remained elusive. Not surprising, since she had been in a state of confusion since her 1000th birthday when the darkness had first appeared. Who makes these things? Very old men with very large glasses, Rayhen called from the doorway. She gripped the podium from behind with sweaty palms. Her face flamed dark red as she whirled around to face the King of Air. Her heart pounded as she watched him stroll into the room with his hands in his pockets and his braids dangling like bells. I came looking for you, and AF pointed me here. She happened to pass by the library while she was working on her household routine and saw you looking around. What are you researching? Contemplating murder of words, more like. Rayhen ran a finger down the page, and amusement curled his lips upward. Why are you contemplating the murder of my index book then? I can't imagine what it has done to offend you. She glanced sideways at the frustrating tome and crossed her arms. It hides secrets from me about the darkness. Ah, he said in understanding and dropped his hand from the page. Well, I happen to be researching the same thing. Shall we do it together? Rayhen jerked his chin toward the doorway and wandered back the way he came. She followed him down the green carpeted halls and peeked at the map she pulled from her pocket. They appeared to be heading toward the western wing of the house. Rayhen stopped at a large set of oak doors and opened them. To reveal a study. He used his foot to keep the door from swinging shut and gestured for her to enter first. A large blackwood desk dominated the room. Behind the ornately carved piece was a high-back armchair with beautiful gold-embroidered ivy leaves stitched into the navy blue cushions. Books were artfully arranged on the shelves, although a few were in piles on the floor. The desk had several candles, paper, ink, and writing brushes organized across it. The emerald carpet perfectly matched the heavy drapes pulled back from diamond-paned windows. The sun shone through the glass to illuminate an opulent chessboard in the corner. She lingered by a geared and oak cupboard and peered through the glass panels at a few petrified wood sculptures. Rayhen shut the door to the study and led her to a window seat behind the desk. She fluffed her skirts and watched him pull several books from the shelf, then stack them on the floor at her feet. Meeb picked up the top tome and read the inscription. It's about the collision, Meeb said as she opened to the first page. We need to start somewhere. I vote at the very beginning. She read the scroll of ink across the vellum page. A star near the earth converged and scorched the surface of the earth. Darkness and light merged, and out of the destruction came 5 beings. First the phoenix, then the imperial dragon, the stag king, Tejas, and a queen of darkness. How much of the collision legend do you believe? Rayhen scanned the books while he asked her the question. I don't know. Maybe the 5 beings that came first don't know. It's still worth researching. Absolutely. She thumbed the pages, but the guilt was niggling at her conscience. I need to tell you something, Rayhen. He paused his stacking and raised an eyebrow. Meeb felt her mouth dry from nerves but pressed through the uncomfortable feeling. On my 1000th birthday, I died from spontaneous combustion, and I killed everyone in the castle. Part of my power is to regenerate every 1000 years, and I explode like a star when it dies, then go through a rapid process of rebirth. It's how I live longer than other beings. Neither my parents nor I suspected I had this condition to my powers. They both wielded light magic, but they never regenerated, so it was completely unexpected when it happened to me. When I came back from the dead, I felt a power besides my light element. The darkness attached to me, but I never understood how or why. She inhaled deeply and prayed Rayhen would believe her story when no one ever had before. Something in his steady emerald and gold gaze gave her courage to let the words rush out. I summoned the kings and queens to the chamber of 5 kings. I told them what had happened at my coronation and that my parents had died. They didn't believe me and had the brilliant idea to behead me for treason. They thought I'd murdered my parents to take the crown and lied about having the ability to come back from the dead. I regenerated again after my head was severed from my body and killed the kings and queens of the 1st generation. Just like I had during my celebration. I fled to my castle and never told anyone how an entire ruling body vanished. The 2nd generation of kings spent years figuring out the mystery behind their parents' deaths. I could never say anything because I feared they would make the same mistake and try to have me killed. The darkness returned from whatever pocket of the universe it originated from and reconnected with me every time I came back to life. Flickers of flame sizzled along the large plait that wove down the center of his head. It was the 2nd time she had seen actual flame sputter through his strands. I suspected last night there was more to the story than what you told me. I want to hear what you have to say about the darkness, all of it. I have no control over the darkness, I never did. I can only tell you what I know from the millennia it haunted me. The flame receded, and the copper braid returned. He rubbed his thumb over his palm and leaned against the wall of books. I believe you about the darkness and the other rulers. I'm depending on you for any information that can help us to form a plan to save the rest of Etruria. She set aside the book she was holding and sat in a red velvet window seat. The darkness is anti-life magic. My theory has been that it exists in the same way as my light element. My element of light and the darkness are drawn to each other. I don't know what wields it or if it's just rogue magic that happened to find me. If it's anti-life magic, then I might be able to help. I can wield all the elements of the earth at once. Fire, earth, water, and air. I'm just not sure what combination would be effective in stopping the darkness, but we might not be powerless. Meeba's mouth opened in shock. She'd never met a being that could wield 4 elements at one time. I don't know if that would work, but we can look in the books to corroborate your theory. Agreed. He picked up a book on his desk and smiled. Chapter 5. Rayhen glanced at Meeb from atop ladder rung while she leaned her nose toward a book. She sat on a window seat with her sea green skirt fanned around her. When he first encountered Meeb, her magic felt intense, like a quasar bursting from a black hole. It was different now that she was seated in a state of calm. Her aura was now soft and luminous beams pulsed around her being. Meeba's bottom lip stuck between her teeth while she tapped a fingernail against a page in time to her thoughts. Rayhen paused stacking books and slid down the ladder. He peered over her shoulder and inquired, "Did you find anything to help us understand the darkness?" She tucked a curl behind her ear and pulled her book in her lap. "I haven't found anything. I'm reading about astronomical magic right now. I love the section that explains how our souls become stars when we die. It's beautiful to have someone you love looking down from the sky. They are always with you even when they can't exist in a physical form anymore." He sat down next to Meeb and grabbed a book from a pile by her feet entitled The Mystic Arts of Desiree. "It is comforting to know your family and friends are always with you. I think about the kings from the 1st and 2nd generation existing up there too. Then it isn't so nice. What happened to corrupt the second generation of kings so badly? I have no idea. Etruscan politics were twisted before I took the throne. My parents didn't talk about what happened in the chamber of the 5 kings. I suppose I would have found out if my regeneration hadn't happened the night of my coronation. Rayhen was still wrapping his head around his grandfather and grandmother voting to have Meeb beheaded. It was a cruel punishment, but maybe some circumstances led them to believe Meeb was a threat. Like Meeb, he didn't know what happened between other rulers. Even now he was king, Rayhen wasn't privy to what went on beyond his borders. I guess we may never know why Etrusia is in a state of unresolved political catastrophe. She leaned back against the wall and fluffed her skirts around her ankles. I don't know. Maybe the darkness will be a wake-up call, and the 5 kingdoms will finally work together. I never had any good encounters with Xerxes during King Darian's reign. Or the current ruler King Xerius. King Maxim now rules Riverfold, and he isn't so bad. He keeps to himself and doesn't speak much at our 5 kings meetings. King Balthazar is obnoxious. I really can't describe the utter nonsense that comes out of his mouth. He once suggested the kings put all their gold in one treasury and then vote on distributing it. In theory, that would work if we were a unified nation and all 5 kings agreed on everything, but we don't. It would just give Xerxes an excuse to exercise their greed, and Dizeri would find a way to exploit their power. Thankfully, Maxim also agreed. With a tied vote, it never got passed. That's one of our major problems. With an even number of votes, there isn't a tiebreaker anymore. The Etruscan kings haven't convened in a few years. The longer the barriers are up, the more distant the relationships between kingdoms become. Meeb tilted her head back and closed her eyes. I don't know if isolation is the answer to solving problems with the royals of Etrusia. I'd implement a vote to remove the barriers if anyone listened. As I said, we have no tiebreaker anymore. The numbers always end up 2 against 2, or we argue and never bring anything to vote. We've just stagnated, and eventually, we stopped showing up to fuse our ideas altogether. Meeb dropped her chin and opened her eyes to gaze at him. You can change the way things are done in Etrusia. That's what being a king means. Having the power to give your people unfettered access to the world, to their desires. Accepting your fate is just as bad as writing terrible laws. Rayhen considered Meeba's experience. She was older than him by 2,500 years. You're right. Thought without action is just as bad as acting without thinking. Her eyelashes shut halfway, and her gaze narrowed as she tapped her pointer finger against her lips. Explain your power again. I could show you how I wield the elements if you want. She dropped her finger and leaned over her knees, resting her arms on her folded legs. Yes. I would love to see what you can do. Rayhen commanded the air around them to rustle pages of books, open windows, and then he let the wind settle again. Behind him, the fireplace ignited, fire blazing blue, green, orange, and yellow. Candle wicks lit, then Rayhen sent another gust of wind to blow out the tiny flames. He diminished the fire by concentrating on removing oxygen in the hearth before turning his attention to outside the windows. Rain pattered on trees, and a soft musical cadence showcased his water element. He had to concentrate on communing with the earth when manipulating the weather, but it was a more impressive aspect of his power. The rain ceased, branches from chestnut trees bent and peeked across a windowsill behind Meeb. A few leaves flicked droplets onto Meeba's shoulders, then pulled back and straightened their limbs. Rayhen folded his hands in his lap and watched Meeb as she chuckled and brushed water from her arms and hair. That was amazing. How do you do that? Meeb shook her curls over her shoulders and looked at him with wide eyes. He rubbed the back of his neck at her compliment and quirked his lips to the side in delight. Thank you. I never really explained it to anyone before. It's sort of like breathing to me, I just do it, and it happens. There must be some sort of communication between you and the elements. Like with my light, I direct it with my thoughts. Rayhen nodded his head once and said, yes. I direct fire, air, earth, and water elements with my thoughts, but I also have a relationship with the earth. Trees speak to me in their language, and I can also interpret animal sounds and reciprocate them. Water has a musical sensation that resonates through my body, and fire is an emotional experience. A feeling goes along with each element. Like my soul and the earth's soul are connected and exchanging energies, feelings, and intentions. I've had moments where fire has erupted without my consciousness or water has sprung from a faucet. The communication goes both ways, my direction to the earth and the earth directing me. She bobbed her curls, and her lips made a small O shape before she spoke. It's very cool. Cecilida was an earth wielder. Does the rest of your power come from your mother? Neither of my parents could command all four elements. We are alike then. We possess powers greater than our parents. Well, in my case, it was because I was adopted. Adopted? His ears rang from her shout. Yes, Rayhen looked down at his palms. My parents were unable to conceive. One day, my father said he and my mother woke up to a baby crying, and I was nestled in a potted fern. They didn't know how I got there or where I came from, but they raised me as their son. They adopted me as their heir and named me Crown Prince of the Aryan throne. How interesting. It's as if you sprang out of the earth itself. A phenomenon like that isn't uncommon in our world but very rare. Air is known for being the land of dreams and folklore. Your kingdom is imagination itself, just like Cecilida. He had a great mind and believed in the possibility of anything happening. I always assumed you were his son by blood. I heard from Cecilida that your mother had red hair. I would never have guessed you were adopted. Rayhen exhaled a frustrated breath. He wouldn't have mentioned it. Because Etruscan law doesn't state that an adopted son cannot take the throne, but he didn't want to take the chance that the other kings or the noble council of heir would deny him an heir. As you are well aware, there was a lot of political estrangement, and my father didn't want attention drawn to his kingdom. Since I was a baby, it was easy to make everyone believe I was born from my mother's womb. As you said, I had red hair and so did my mother. No one thought twice about it. When I was older, and my powers developed differently from my parents, my father explained my birth circumstances and why I must keep it a secret. My father didn't know how to train my powers, but he hired the best tutors to give me a royal education. When he died, I figured out how to manage my magic alone. It still hurts Cecilida didn't trust me with his secret. He knew all of mine. She crossed her arms and bit her bottom lip, her gaze directed behind him at the wall as if the answer to why his father kept her in the dark lay hidden somewhere in the house. Well, there's another reason I needed to keep my adoption a secret. He blushed a little and cleared his throat. It isn't just wielding four elements that differentiate me from my parents. There's another part to this story. Meeb drew her attention back to him and stared at him sitting across from her on the lounge. What do you mean? She asked and scrunched her eyebrows together. Rayhen inhaled and kept his steady gaze toward her. I have an alternate form as well. One that intensifies my ability to wield my powers and the four elements of earth, air, water, and fire. She inched back so her spine was flush with the arm of the window seat and opened her mouth a little as she took a breath. Why didn't you show me earlier? Every time someone sees my other form, which is more natural than the one you are looking at, they get scared. I must consciously direct my transformative magic to keep my appearance looking like a being. I can even appear as a being when I sleep. Meeba's shoulders were still stiff, but her features relaxed. I understand. I've had to hide the bulk of my power too. People like to believe anyone who disrupts the status norm is dangerous. But, if you don't mind, I'd like to see your full power, including your alternate form. He widened his eyes and opened his mouth in surprise at her request. Are you sure you want to see it? It's monstrous. I won't lie. I am not afraid. If I can face down death and darkness, survive Ananias and his iniquity, and endure 2 generations of pretentious kings, then I can handle witnessing something unusual. Besides, aren't you tired of hiding? Rayhen hoped he wasn't making a mistake by trusting Meeb, but he steadied his breathing and freed his magic. His power of transformation was an aspect of his creation magic. A natural chemical was released into his body that triggered his system to change. Rayhen felt his muscles tingle as blood rushed through his veins, his body tensed, and his skin altered first. His entire epidermis was no longer supple but now had a second layer on the outside like armor. He looked down at his hands, stained like the inside of a tree. Ringed and blended, the tans replaced his pale skin tone. His fingernails were long sharp claws, strong as steel and black. His jaw stretched, and his peripheral vision glimpsed large tusks where his lower canines used to be. He looked at Meeb, but his vision could not focus for some reason. His ability to view the world through infrared radiation became skewed. He looked behind her to watch a bird flutter past. Rayhen noticed yellow and orange light around the bird's center, but when he returned his gaze to Meeb, light scattered around her body. Multicolored lines twisted and blinked instead of concentrating on a specific color code. He should be able to discern orange, yellow and red umber waves at the hottest points in her body and green, blue, and purple splotches toward the cooler parts. It was like looking at fireworks or a kaleidoscope when he gazed at Meeb. He switched his vision to the way it was when his being form was dominant. How is your hair not burning is your skin made of wood now? She leaned forward and stretched out her hand as if she would touch him but retracted it before making contact. Rayhen diminished his tusks so he could enunciate his words better. I'm not sure how the elements balance themselves through my body. It's magic. She huffed a laugh and curled her feet under her, so she was kneeling in front of him. Amazing. And you had tusks. Your eyes changed too. They were larger, like a mountain lion, and the pupils were wider too. I had to change them back. Your light magic was making your body look like rainbow fireworks. You use infrared radiation to observe in this form. Rayhen dipped his chin and said, yes. But your light magic was making me dizzy. I saw too many colors and energy pulses at once. Aren't you afraid? No. It's fascinating. I love how your fire glows with red strands through the orange flames, almost like your hair is still present. And it flickers with embers. Teeth and claws aren't anything new to me. My cousin transforms into a dragon. I can imagine how people in Etruria would find this appearance intimidating. He retracted his claws and rubbed his hands on his tan pants. Kings and queens are normally the strongest beings in the kingdom. It's not that I think I'm less powerful. I just hate to feel like a freak on display. I just find most people run in the opposite direction when they see me, or they make cruel remarks. You are powerful, I can feel all the elements. They are tangible when you let them free. He slowed his breathing and transformed back to his appearance as a being. Will all my power be enough to stand against the darkness? It's creation magic. Meeb blinked her long honey-colored lashes and pursed her lips together. After a moment, she said, I don't know, but if we don't come up with a plan to stop the darkness, then the entire world is going to be destroyed. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. After sitting for an hour, Meeb wanted to stretch and take a walk around the gardens after lunch. She and Rayhen weren't any closer to finding a clue to how to defeat the darkness. She stood and opened her mouth to inform Rayhen she wanted to take a break, but she suddenly doubled over in agony. Terror seized her as pain assailed her womb. A tormented breath lodged in her throat, and she scrunched her features as her stomach clenched. I need to go to my room. Can you get Aof? She wasn't sure she could walk, but Aof was the only one she trusted to examine her physical condition. Rayhen's face drained of color, no doubt mimicking her expression. He tried to help her walk, but Meeb collapsed and curled in a ball. The pain was crippling, and it was all she could do to stay conscious. I'm going to have to carry you. I can walk. If she allowed Rayhen to lift her, he'd feel the slight bump from her pregnancy. She could pass it off as part of her curves from a distance, but not direct contact. It doesn't look like it. He hovered around her and rubbed her back as she breathed through the cramping. I'll be okay. She counted to 30 and used a chair leg to hoist up her body. She leaned over the desk, gripping the edge as she pleaded her power would keep the illusion masking the pregnancy in place. After a moment, the pain subsided enough, and she could take a step. She wiped tears from her eyes and took Rayhen's proffered arm. He guided her back down the hall. She stopped a couple of times from catching her breath, then resumed her determined strides. Sweat poured down Meeba's forehead. Her body shook with cold, but she made it back to her room. Rayhen helped her to sit on the bed, then ran to get Aof. She lay back on the pillows and rubbed her stomach. Her body started to calm down, but she was terrified of what was happening with the baby. The baby changed everything in her life. The variation in hormones and magic during her first trimester inside her body caused her to vomit every day, and she couldn't keep food down. Her body settled enough at the end of the day so she could sip water. Ananias didn't visit her once she fell ill. She didn't know she was pregnant until her monthly cycle stopped coming. The drugs left her system, and she regained some of her sense of awareness. The darkness began to fade as her magic became weaker from the biological block with her pregnancy each day. 3 months. 3 months she was sick and felt like she would die, but her determination to escape grew. Aof swung open the door and crossed the room to examine her stomach. I need you to release the magic on your pregnancy so I can check the baby. Where's Rayhen? He's outside waiting. Take your dress off so I can examine you, please. All right. Meeb sat up and slipped her gown off. Aof placed her palms on Meeba's stomach and pressed down with her fingers. She pulled a cone device from her apron pocket and put it over Meeba's womb. Aof placed her ear to the narrow tip of the device and listened. Meeb tried not to wince when Aof examined her internally. her fingers poking at her cervix and pressing against her uterus. Af put the odd cone device in her apron again, then entered the bathroom. She returned to the bed, wiping her hands on her apron and planting her hands on her hips. Your cervix is still closed. The fluids sound like they are flowing well, and I can't detect any blockage. I'm going to say you are experiencing stress. It is common for a mother's magic to fight against their pregnancy, but added emotional distress can trigger contractions. You need to rest and let your mind heal with your body. I'll be back in a moment to help you into the bath. I need to get some supplies from the kitchen. There was no reason she couldn't research the darkness in her room, and she would just have to tell Rayhen she wasn't feeling well. Af returned with a basket of herbs and boiling pots of water. She went to the bath and poured the steaming and medicinal herbs into the basin. Af coaxed Meeb from the bed and had her sit in the infusion. Tiny tendrils of vapor curled about her head from the surface heat. He's going to find out soon. Af scrubbed down Meeba's body with a cotton cloth and massaged her back. I know. I've only got 2 more months before the siphoning stage. I'll tell him, Af. Just not now. She patted Meeb on the shoulder. Well, climb out. I've got some healing ointment that will help relax your muscles. I want you to drink some tea and sleep. Will you let Rayhen into the room? So, I can tell him everything is under control. Of course, Your Majesty. Rayhen knocked on the door to Meeba's room and heard a prompt enter. As his fist fell to his side, he turned the handle and stepped over the threshold, taking in the view of the bedchamber. Meeb propped on the pillows with the covers pulled up to her chest. Her lower eyelids looked puffy and purple, giving her face a haggard appearance. Are you all right? She reached around her neck to settle her curls over one shoulder. I'm doing better. Thank you for your concern. Af says it's stress. Is there anything I can do to help? She shook her head no. I feel safe here. I haven't felt that way in a long time. If there's anything you need, just let me or Af know. I'll let you rest. He turned to leave, wanting to give her space to recover. Rayhen. She called his name in a way that increased his heartbeat. He paused and faced her again. Yes. Would you mind bringing the books in here so we can look through them? We can pause our research today, but I think we should pick it up again tomorrow. If you're sure. Her sweet smile brightened her worn features, and her body illuminated with her light magic. Yes. I'll be better in the morning. I'll bring them after breakfast then. Thank you. He departed from the room and shut the door. Rayhen headed left and walked down the hall to his study. He would clean up and sort through the books they had already researched, then eat lunch. He slipped his hands into his pockets and analyzed the information Meeb gave him on the darkness. For years, it was a part of her power, so he wondered if the anti-life magic needed a host. If that was the case, why didn't it kill Meeb when it was feeding on her power? On the tail end of that thought, how was Ananias able to live past 2,000 years old? He should have died of old age 500 years ago like the other kings of the second generation. He made a mental note to ask Meeb about Ananias' extended lifespan tomorrow. He had other things to worry about, getting his people to safety being at the top of his list. He sent a letter to his general at the castle to evacuate Air and dispatched a letter to each king to warn them of the darkness. Rayhen instructed his general to send Air's citizens into the Bearcliff Mountains. If they were deep enough in the mountain caves, the darkness might not touch them. It was a theory, but it was better than keeping them in air, where they were out in the open with zero protection. Rayhen entered his study and began to sort through the books he and Meeb had already examined. They hadn't been successful in discovering a way to fight the darkness yet, but he would not give up. He thought about Meeb and her power of light. He didn't know why her powers were locked, why she couldn't fight the darkness, but he still held hope. She could save Etrusha. Maybe after she rested, her power would be strong enough to defeat the darkness. Until then, he would continue to search for a way to understand the power of the darkness. Chapter 6. Meeb set her geology book aside and glanced out the window to check the sun's position for the time. She noticed it was noon, then directed her attention to Rayhen. He was seated at a writing desk in the back corner of the bedroom, his body hunched over a book. His left forearm bent on top of the cherry oak surface, and his right index finger ran along the inked page line by line. Sunbeams shone on his braid, turning the strands the color of a campfire mixed with russet. She stretched her arms over her head. She was still in bed and called to Rayhen for a break. "We've been reading all morning. We should put the books down for a bit." He lifted his chin and straightened his position in his wooden chair. "I agree. I'm starting to get a neck ache from bending over." She pushed the covers off and swung her legs over the edge of the bed. "I'm ready for lunch and maybe a walk around the house." Rayhen shut his book and jumped up from his seat. "I'll have bring food here. We can set up a table, so you don't have to move around too much. I'm feeling a lot better, but lunch in here sounds great." He pulled the rope by the bed that would signal to a staff member they needed assistance. Meeb had a similar bell system in Blackwood Castle, and she wondered if Rayhen's household operated the same way. In her court, the wires connected to a mechanism that rang a bell in the staff quarters, the kitchen, and the main hall. She leaned against a bedpost and crossed her arms as she watched Rayhen straighten a few books on the table near her bed. "I wonder if we will ever figure out what caused the darkness. I feel like it is just as mysterious today as it was 3,000 years ago when it attached to me in the first place. I've had a thought since we began this journey of discovering the origin of the darkness." He turned to face her and leaned back on the nightstand. "How did Ananias survive all these years? It's way past his expiration date." She had to laugh at his choice of words for Ananias' extended existence on Earth. "Since I had no idea how much time passed while I was imprisoned, I was unaware he was living past his expected lifespan for a being. I have no idea how he did it." She pinched her nose and decided to trust Rayhen with the rest of the truth about her marriage. "He drugged me and kept my mind in a state of hallucination. I don't know what herbal concoction he used. The last millennia was like walking through a nightmare world. My thoughts were disconnected and scrambled, even though I could do simple things like eat and move around. I felt like a puppet on a string, and Ananias was the master holding the cross sticks." Rayhen put a hand over his mouth and leaned over to grip the table. His face became red, then paled as she watched his profile. He angled his chin over his shoulder to peer at her. "Son above, I'm sorry. I don't even have words for what's been done to you by the past kings or Ananias." Meeb ran her fingers over her scalp, then dropped them into her lap. "It was a tactical and political marriage that went from bad to worse. Was my father the only one who acted like a respectful being?" Pleasant memories overtook her at the thought of Cecilida and how he supported her through their friendship. "Cecilida and I had similar views on how to improve our societies inside our kingdoms. I trusted Cecilida, and that's why I ran for heir's border. Are the other kings in the third generation as understanding as you? He was silent for a few minutes and stared straight ahead. Rayhen turned his autumn-tinted gaze back to her. I think King Maxim of Riverfold would help us and believe your story. He is level-headed, and his suggestions for Etruscan policies have always been fair to all the kingdoms. He is often ignored at Five Kings meetings like I am. It's always Xerxes and Desiree against Riverfold and Air. Not much has changed between our kingdoms since your imprisonment. We can send a letter to Maxim and see if he will meet us here in Air. Riphiona, the king of the Emerald Forest, I think may help as well. He isn't a part of the Five Kingdoms, even though his forest exists inside of Air's borders. We've left him alone since the first generation of kings established Air as a kingdom, and he doesn't bother us either. From my grandfather's record books, I know that Riphiona has several clans of shapeshifters that live in the forest. We can see if he is willing to help. I don't trust Xerxes or Desiree, and their kings continue to suggest policies that work in favor of their kingdoms but not Etruria as a whole. After what you told me of Ananias trying to take over all five kingdoms, I'm going to err on the side of caution with King Balthazar of Desiree. We shall see. A knock on the door paused their conversation. Come in. Meeb called out. The door swung inward, and Aef entered with a curtsy. What can I do for you, your majesties? Rayhen's features were warm and relaxed as he addressed Aef. We will take lunch in here today, Aef. I will prepare it right away, your majesty. Is there anything else you require? I'm fine for now, Meeb said, smoothing down her coverlet. Thank you, Aef. Rayhen gave her a kind smile and signaled she could leave. Aef curtsied again and left them to continue their conversation. I hope the letters to King Maxim and Riphiona are received well, and they respond to our call for help. Meeb stood and wandered to the window. She watched a few birds flitter between the branches of a walnut tree that was rooted near the house. They are not like the other kings. They are cooperative, especially Riphiona. He has coexisted with Etruria without political or magical dispute. I also sent a message to the other kings to inform them of the darkness. Meeb spun around and put a hand to her mouth as horror eclipsed her mood. We better hope they listen because Xerxes is the other kingdom bordering Ravenna. I left all my gold and treasure when I fled my kingdom. I don't know about King Xerius, but his father, King Darion, would have jumped at the opportunity to steal my kingdom's wealth. Especially if he thought everyone was dead and it would be easy to invade my territory. Rayhen tilted his head down and rubbed his face. Sun above. We can't open the barriers to head them off in case the darkness is still trapped in Ravenna. There's a chance we could negotiate the money back if they open the barriers and invade, but that would let the darkness into their kingdom. We will have a bigger problem then. Can you send someone to Xerxes to get a feel for their loyalties? I can. I'm already getting indigestion, and I haven't even had lunch. Meeb inhaled, and she recalled she had one more ally they could call upon. I can contact my family on the Aquarian Islands. They would also be willing to help me. The Aquarian dragon race. That would be some serious firepower. She detected interest in his voice. Yes. My uncle is the current king of the Aquarian Islands and the shape-shifting dragons. Hopefully, they don't think a ghost is contacting them. They don't know about my regenerative powers. On the day of my coronation, a dispute with the island of Cork kept my family from attending. My mother didn't inherit the dragon blood, if you are wondering. No one knows why, She was the only offspring of phoenix and fish to have entirely different magic. You're full of surprises. Granddaughter to the first creatures to form after the collision, impressive. He laughed a little and shook his head at her newest information. I've lived for 4,000 years. I would expect my life to be a little interesting. Interesting is an understatement. Meeb had to agree, her life was a dramatic display of the preposterous. If we survive the darkness, I want to go on a very long vacation to a deserted island where no beings exist. I can't say I blame you. She reached out and placed her palm on Rayhen's arm. We will get through this together, and I believe a better nation will be formed once we triumph over the darkness. Chapter 7. King Maxim materialized inside of Rayhen's study 2 days later. Rayhen sat flabbergasted as he watched the ether split between Riverfold's castle and his house. King Maxim waved a hand, and the dimensional rift sealed shut behind him. He settled into the opposite seat, across from Rayhen on the other side of the desk. His dark coffee strands swept back in a leather hairband with his crown perched over his thick brow. His brown gaze surveyed the room with an air of lethality and mysticism, like the wolves glaring at Rayhen from his silver crown and navy blue shoulder sash. King Maxim. Welcome. This is unexpected. Rayhen scrambled from his seat to pull the rope that would bring a staff member to his study. Meeb was strolling around the house exploring and getting some exercise, but she should be present for a meeting with Riverfold's king. Maxim is fine. I didn't want to waste time after I read your letter. Maxim spoke with a thick accent. Each kingdom had a different way of saying Etruscan, and Riverfold's dialect had a strong pronunciation against their back palate. Rayhen cleared his throat and resumed his seat while waiting for someone to answer his bell call. He shuffled the papers on his desk and straightened an inkwell. That means you at least believed something I wrote. A whisper of amusement twitched Maxim's lips, but his gaze remained stoic. Yes. Among other things. King Maxim. Maxim is fine. He repeated and crossed one leg over the other, steepling his fingers. Maxim, we need help. My father, King Mavias, sold my younger sister Isabella to Desiree before he died. I have the power to wield time and space magic, it's how I was able to pass through the barrier to meet with you today. I cannot locate Isabella inside Desiree's capital even with this power. I've looked for 500 years, but they have hidden her well. Or she is no longer inside their kingdom. My greatest wish is to tear Desiree apart and retrieve my sister. Riverfold will fight with her against Desiree and the darkness. Rayhen stared at the king of Riverfold. Maxim could have been an ally for the last millennium, but like Rayhen, he chose to remain in isolation. Thank you for your aid. If you don't mind my asking, why did you never bring to vote for the magic walls to be taken down? When I took the crown, I vowed to dispense with the way Riverfold blindly followed Xerxes and Desiree. I liberated my people from my grandfather and father's years of poor government management. Keeping the barriers in place allowed my kingdom to evolve and reform. I suppose it was a way to keep Riverfold separated from Desiree and Xerxes' influence forever. A knock at the door broke the tension in the room. Enter. Rayhen waited as an attendant opened the door and asked how he could assist. Please inform Her Majesty, Queen Meeb, that she is needed in my study. Thank you. Another knock heralded Meeb a few minutes later as she stepped into the room and inclined her chin in respect to Maxim. Her light magic was an incandescent aura around her body as she walked across the room. Her honey-colored curls bounced with her movements, and the azure color of her gown made her eyes look like quicksilver. She lifted her chin and it gave her a regal appearance. Rayhen observed Maxim rise from his chair, eyebrows raised and eyes widened. He bowed at his waist and addressed Meeb. Queen Meeb. Meeb is fine to use. I don't enforce the use of my title when speaking with the other kings. Her voice was clear and controlled with a melodic lilt to her vowels he hadn't noticed before. You may use my informal name then as well. I am Maxim. I never adhered to the formalities between Etruscan rulers either. We're all the same rank, are we not? We are indeed, Meeb responded. Rayhen's letter informed me of the darkness and requested a meeting to discuss if I had any information in my libraries pertaining to such a power. But what I'm curious about right now is how you survived for 3 generations of kings and why you broke the treaty. Meeba's lips pressed together, and she said, I had no choice but to run from the darkness, and I have no idea how the barrier opened. There was no one around when I fell through. As for how I survived, I'm surprised Mavias didn't tell you I could regenerate. It's the reason the 2nd generation imprisoned me. Maxim's eyebrows shot up, just like they did when she entered the room. If my father knew, he never said a word about it to me. The barriers are like a membrane around each kingdom, the magic is coded to the bloodline of each king. Only someone sharing a blood link to the royal family could have let you into air. The only exception to that rule is time and space magic because they exist beyond the confines of our physical laws of Earth. Since the blood magic binds to the Earth for the barriers, it cannot be easily severed. That is the first mystery we must solve. The other curiosity is that the darkness did not breach the barrier either. This development leads me to believe that a being may be wielding the power of darkness. Meeb inched to the edge of her seat. She gripped the arms of her chair and spoke to Maxim. I have not discounted the theory of a being wielding the darkness. The problem with this idea is I've never been able to see a being. The darkness has only ever been a shadow, like a presence in the corner of my eye. I can sense it, but every time I go to look, it is gone. The sensation of being drained, of all my magic waning into the ether, is what I felt for 3,000 years. Maxim angled his body to face Meeb. Your power of light emits, reveals, and shines. Darkness hides, absorbs, and diminishes. If a being were to wield total darkness, it could hide from you within its element. Look at how you are shining right now, and the being would be doing the opposite. It would be hiding so completely you would never know it was there. Rayhen had been scribing their meeting, his writing brush stilled as Maxim's explanation of the light and dark elements registered in his mind. How the blazing sun did a being survive her regeneration then? How did no one in Etruria know there was a being that could wield darkness? I think we now know the answers we need to seek. Look for old record books, genealogies, anything that will tell us about the beings in Etruria. I will go back to Riverfold and look through our libraries. Maxim rose from his seat, a sign that the meeting had concluded. Meeb also rose and nodded her head to show respect to Maxim. Thank you. If you find anything about the darkness in Riverfold's library, please let us know. Rayhen stood and came around the desk. He extended his hand, which Maxim grasped in a sign of friendship. You are welcome any time in air. Consider my kingdom a friend and ally to yours. The same courtesy is extended to you both. I think it is wise to keep this between ourselves for now. Desiree has been no comrade to Riverfold, and I wouldn't consider Xerxes to be a friend either. Rayhen couldn't deny Xerxes and Desiree refused to evolve past their greedy and egocentric ways. The other two kingdoms were warned about the darkness. Please let us know if you hear anything from King Balthazar or King Xerius. Until our next meeting. Maxim bowed at the waist to Meeb, then to Rayhen, and commanded the ether to split again by waving his hand. I will inform you if either kingdom contacts me. Good day to you both. The King of Riverfold stepped through the tear in the ether where Rayhen could once again see the interior of the other kingdom's castle. When the hole closed, Rayhen pivoted toward Meeb. I think that went well. Meeb rubbed a thumb in a circle over her palm. I don't know how we are going to fight a being that hides so completely we can't even see it. It's better than rogue magic floating around. This might explain why the darkness didn't pass through the barriers too. A being wouldn't be able to follow you unless whoever opened the barrier wanted it to. Yes, but why would the darkness haunt me all this time? How the blazing sun did the being survive my regenerations? Meeb rubbed her arms as she started to pace the room. How many regenerations have you had? She paused her stride and dropped her arms. I've had a total of 4. Rayhen whistled at the number of times Meeb died and returned to life. That's a lot. She bit her lip and creased her brows as she continued to discuss the new theory on the darkness. I can understand it hiding in a place where I couldn't see it and staying beyond the radius of my regenerative blast. But then why did it suddenly decide to kill me? I've been the host, and the darkness has been like a parasite feeding from me. It's been a symbiotic relationship up until this point. It doesn't make sense for it to suddenly unleash all of its power at once and chase after me. Rayhen reviewed all the information he knew about Meeb and the darkness for a moment. You said Ananias manipulated it. I did. But I thought Ananias manipulated the magic. Now I wonder if he knew it was a being. She flopped down on the seat in front of the desk and covered her face with her hands. All of that still doesn't explain how the being got to Ravenna in the first place and why it decided to feed off you for eternity. She dropped her hands and looked up. Yes. I want to know what the blazing sun is going on to. At least we have a better idea of what to look for now. Meeba's features relaxed, and she lounged back in the chair, kicking her feet out. Yes, thanks to Maxim. All right. We've beat this topic to death today. What should we do now? I have to evacuate my entire kingdom, including everyone in this house. We are going to have to pack and leave for Emerald Castle as soon as possible. I have nothing to pack. Take whatever you need from my mother's suite. It's yours. He wanted to help Meeb. He wanted to show her not every being or king would betray her. Thank you, Rayhen. We will leave at dawn. Chapter 8. Meeb always had an affinity for forests and mountains. She liked to watch the beams of light through the canopy of branches as if they had a story to share with each rustle of leaves. Nothing could compare to the earthly smells that permeated through thick mountain passes or rich soil after a rainfall. Every blade of grass felt like a strand of hair brushing through her fingers. Every leaf had a vibrant color and shape. The mossy glens were supple beds made for languid afternoons basking in the sun. Flower groves tantalized her nose. As she watched Rayhen put the last trunk into the wagon that would take the household to Emerald Castle, Meeb felt like she could sense the forest in his aura. She couldn't access her full mystical sight that allowed her to see the truth of someone's soul and magic. The baby locked down most of her stronger powers, but every time she paused to examine Rayhen, his magic called to her. His creation power resonated with her light like a blossom beckoning the sun to give it life. She had a profound conviction that her powers and Rayhen's belonged together. Rayhen stepped into a patch of sun, and she watched as embers flickered along the strands of his hair, reminding her of lava. His russet hair appeared crimson sometimes when his emotions became passionate. Most of the time, it was the color of a campfire. The scent of warm cedar, cinnamon, and crisp morning air lured her closer. That should be the end of the packing. We can leave as soon as the staff is ready. Rayhen straightened from setting a chest on the floor inside a wagon and turned toward her. Meeb jolted backward and shook her head clear of whatever compulsion made her want to get closer to Rayhen. Great. I think I would prefer to ride next to Aeth. I can't stand to be on horseback. Sure. I'll lead the wagons. We're going to stop by the Emerald Forest and speak to Rifiona on our way to the castle. Meeb hugged her arms and swayed as she gazed at the trees around Rayhen's estate. What's he like? Rifiona was the first being to sprout from the world after the collision. All the trees covered the earth, flowers blossomed, and plants grew when he came into being. He is ancient, keeps to himself. He doesn't come out of his forest kingdom often, but our conversations are brief. Meeb leaned against the first wagon and observed Rayhen's profile. Bathed in sunlight. Sounds like I have a lot in common with Rifiona. Rayhen tucked his hands in his pockets and turned his position to meet her gaze. I think you will like him. His High Commander is a female eagle shapeshifter, and he is wise. He has coexisted with Air for 3 generations of Etruscan kings. He understands and respects the differences of our cultures. A female who commands his army, a king who doesn't impose his rule. I like him already. Rayhen looked toward the Emerald Forest in the distance. Shall we? Meeb watched him a moment before she responded. Absolutely. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. A gravel path led away from the house, following a clear stream that wound into a valley. The wind whispered in Rayhen's ear, brushing against his skin with a supple breeze. The bare cliff mountains in the background of his kingdom added an element of wonder to its picturesque view. The snow-covered peaks kissed the azure sky, and puffy white clouds drifted around their pointed stalwart structure. Rayhen felt the spirit of the earth call to him every time he stared at the mesmerizing hills of air. A symphonic cadence of rustling leaves, chattering animals, and buzzing insects harmonized with his soul. He turned in his saddle to glance over his shoulder at the wagon behind his horse. Meeb sat in silent reflection, her gaze roving over the lowlands of air. A pleasant smile tipped up the corners of her mouth, making the shape of her lips appear like a hunter's bow. Even from this distance, he could see her exquisite, honey-colored lashes blink against her round cheeks. She fiddled with a curl. Rayhen always admired the way they looked like loose cones, as opposed to tiny ringlets most of the female courtiers in his castle preferred. Meeba's strands bounced as if they were a part of the effervescent light she emanated. He turned around again and squinted against the sun across the green horizon of his kingdom. He didn't have a terrible relationship with Rifiona, but they were not friends either. They would arrive at the border of the Emerald Forest in about 20 minutes. Rayhen's grandfather discovered the land of Etrusia before the 5 kingdoms formed and bargained with Rifiona to share the land surrounding the Emerald Forest. The land belonged to Rifiona, but Rayhen ruled the people of Air. So long as Air did not disturb anyone living in the kingdom of the Stag King, there would be peace. It was also why Air retained its natural autumn atmosphere. The Stag King controlled the color of the leaves, the weather, and even the animals they hunted for food. Rayhen halted his blonde stallion at the tree line of the Emerald Forest. Pine trunks bent toward him and blinked as he dismounted from his saddle. The emerald forest's unique shape-shifting giants studied Rayhen in their form as trees. He watched the earth erode as their roots beneath the soil moved, so they formed a blockade at the edge of the forest. He peered through the dim thicket and watched bokeh lights dance around. Lush bushes. Vibrant colored flowers contrasted against the bark of the trees and the shadowy interior of the forest. A breeze rustled the giant shapeshifter pine needles and sent a spicy scent to Rayhen's nose. Gold dust puffed through the air like mushroom clouds. Deer Run River rumbled from his left as its mighty rapids rushed by like a team of horses. Rayhen watched the branches of the giants, still appearing as pines, lean into each other and begin to whisper in the language of the forest. He did not know the translation for the words, but the sentient trees started to move after they finished their conversation. The roots of the trees upturned the soil and rocks, and then the ground trembled as half the trees moved to the left and the other half slid to the right. The earth shook, causing Rayhen to stumble. The horses whinnied behind him, and he heard his staff members call over the commotion, trying to get the animals to settle. Rayhen reached for his stallion's reins and soothed the beast. A massive stag bounded down the center of the aisle made by the living woods. The beautiful animal was the color of ripe walnut shells, with a white tail flicking back and forth as it leaped over rocks and logs. Each antler branch had 12 points that stuck out of its head in a perfect symmetrical arrangement. Its large black eyes stared straight ahead as it ran down the path carpeted in green pine needles and tufts of moss. The stag halted before Rayhen, dust billowed from the ground as its hooves dug into the dry dirt. It tossed its antlers and pawed at a patch of grass with its right foot. Rayhen coughed around the fine debris wafting in the air and waved a hand before his face to clear his vision. He watched the buck's bones crack and elongate, the snout shrunk, and in a fluid display of transformative magic, a male took the place of the deer. He wore a gold vest over a short-sleeve beige tunic tucked into chocolate-brown pants. His knee-high boots had knife sheaths on the sides, and a gold crown of antlers encircled his head. "Good afternoon, Rifiona." Rayhen bowed at his waist to the Stag King of the Emerald Forest. Behind Rifiona, the forest moved again, and the trees closed the space. The Stag King placed his hands on his hips and looked past Rayhen. "I see you have brought an entourage with you. To what do I owe this meeting?" "I am here to warn you about the darkness and ask if you will assist us in finding a way to stop it." Rifiona titled his head to his left side and regarded him a moment. "I know of the darkness. It is I who let Queen Meeb through the barrier." "You?" Rifiona replied and crossed his bare arms. "I am the earth. Nothing of this world denies my magic or command, not even the blood that is used to bind the barriers to the earth and keep the 5 kingdoms separated. Is there anything else you can tell me about the darkness?" "I do not know what it is. It destroyed a piece of my earth, and for that, I consider it an enemy. Meeb and I are heading to Emerald Castle. We have allied with Riverfold's king and are hoping to find a way to stop the darkness. Your help would be greatly appreciated." Rayhen watched Rifiona, his heart pounding before the mighty ancient being. The Stag King turned back to his forest. He spoke to the trees in their language and then returned his black gaze to Rayhen. "I will go with you and stay at Emerald Castle. My giants and army will join your general." Rayhen held out his hand to the Stag King, who shook it once then let his hand drop. "Thank you. My general is evacuating Air's citizens. We are hiding them in the Bearcliff Mountains. Iole, my high commander, will scout them out. My people will find your general using their heightened senses and magic. The giants will move at night time, you will feel the earth shake, but it will not disturb you for long. Bring Queen Meeb over here so I may tell her I saved her life." He strolled over to the wagon, where she sat mesmerized with her pewter gaze wide. She looked down at Rayhen from her perch on the driver's seat. He held out his hand and asked Meeb to meet the Stag King. Rayhen dipped his chin to acknowledge the request and turned to bring Meeb. She placed her fingers on his outstretched palm, and he assisted her down from the wagon. Chapter 9. Meeb wasn't sure what to expect from the animated woods of the Emerald Forest, but she felt petrified as she watched the pine trees move to form a path. A glacial sensation crept through her veins as she recalled her flight from the sentient Blackwood Forest. Even though the Emerald Forest appeared to contain a different species of magical trees, Meeba's mind still focused on her near-death experience a few days ago. She gripped the wood of the wagon seat and waited for the trees to settle. When the roots of the pines stilled, Meeb relaxed and inhaled to her stomach. The Blackwood Forest hadn't always been an untamable chaotic death trap. During the daylight hours, the sentient Blackwood trees slept. At night they came alive to satisfy their carnivorous appetite. Meeb never had a problem with trees so long as her light shone on them. Rayhen came to introduce her to Rifiona a few minutes later. The pine trees of the Emerald Forest swayed in the wind, but they remained rooted in the ground. She slid off her perch next to Aof and followed Rayhen toward the spot where Rifiona waited. Meeb stopped 6 feet from the Emerald Forest tree line and dropped into a brief curtsy before Rifiona. When she lifted her chin from her chest, Meeb observed a squirrel scamper out of the forest and place a nut between Rifiona's boots. He reached down to pick up the nut and said something in a language she did not understand to the squirrel. The critter looked up at the Stag King, chattered and wiggled its whiskers, then scurried away. Rifiona rose with primordial grace and regarded her with his black gaze. He was enormous, taller than Rayhen by a foot. Meeb was petite, not more than 5 feet, and this beast of a male made her neck sore from looking upward. For all his intimidating height, Rifiona had beautiful features. His gorgeous skin was the same color as the nut he held in his hand, and his hair was the color of buckskin. The shades of his physical appearance were so close that it was difficult to distinguish the subtle variation in hues. He was teeming with magical magnetism that made the blades of grass bend toward him and the animals bow in homage. Rifiona. I am Queen Meeb of Ravenna. The Stag King gave a bow and, when he straightened, had to peer down to meet her gaze. I know who you are, Queen Meeb. I am the one who saved you from the darkness. Saved me? Yes. I wield the primordial essence of the earth, which is why I was able to sever the bond that kept the barrier between Ravenna and air in place. The giants, the trees you see around us, notified me of the darkness. When I came to investigate, I also saw you trying to get through the invisible wall. Thank you for saving my life. It would be a shame to lose one of the greatest queens to be born. Rifiona's eyes glowed amber, bright, and beautiful like the morning sun before returning to obsidian. Do you know me? His words confused her since they had never met. He chuckled deep and rich from his throat, the sound vibrating over her skin like static electricity. I know every being on this earth. I made flesh and blood and bone, so everything alive is connected to my power. I knew you even before you knew yourself. She shivered at the omniscient declaration and felt the urge to brighten her light to shield his ancient stare. Do you know of the darkness? As I have said to Rayhen, it is the one thing I cannot see, sense, or understand. It is a plague to the earth, yet it must also be a part of it, for it does not destroy. Dirt, water, and buildings remain. It is an anomaly, but it has made an enemy of me. Anything that takes from the earth does not merit my favor. Perhaps it is not a being then, Meeb mused and tapped her chin with her pointer finger. It can be a being, but it is one that I cannot sense. I am as ancient as the rebirth of our world, but that is not to say other creatures did not exist at the same time as I did. My grandparents are the phoenix and fish. I have believed in the impossible since I was a child. Rifiona's lips quirked in amusement. Ah yes. The phoenix was birthed from the sun before I was created. He is ash, fire, and magic, but even he was made flesh and blood because of my creation. He could not have married fish without becoming a being. Have you met my grandparents? She wondered what the ancient beings of the world thought of each other. I have never met your grandparents, but they know who I am. Just as I know of the ancient being that granted them their wish to become beings. Meeb dropped her hands to her sides and shook her curls. If you are unaware of what the darkness is, then we cannot hope to find its origin in a book. I would not be so swift to discount records. There are many eyes, and though they are the same in composition, they do not witness the same thing. In one blink, a being can capture a moment that is different from a being standing next to them. Then, on to Emerald Castle, Meeb declared and spun on her heel toward the wagon. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Rayhen steered his horse into the courtyard of Emerald Castle, a caravan of 5 wagons, 9 staff members from his house, 200 shapeshifters from the Emerald Forest, Rifiona and Meeb. Clouds brushed across a sky and blended with indigo, rose, and orange on the horizon line from the setting sun. A twilight canvas showed the first twinkling of stars as he dismounted his stallion and handed the reins to a stable hand. He walked to the wagon where Meeb sat observing the courtyard. He raised his hand to offer her support to descend from the wagon. I'll have Aof prepare your room across from mine in case you need anything. I asked Vaerin, my general, to evacuate the capital and anyone living on the outskirts of the kingdom. I'm not sure if the noble council has stayed or left with the rest of the beings in my kingdom. She lifted her skirts and used his hand for leverage as she hopped down to the ground. Cecilida never had anything good to say about the noble council. He said they always tried to find a way to usurp his rule. Rayhen placed her hand on his elbow, ready to escort her inside. I'm afraid they have not improved. The newest nobles are more interested in a lavish lifestyle than cooperating with me to rule or help manage it. If I wasn't in control of the treasury, I doubt there would be any gold left. He paused to give Aof instructions on where to send Meeba's things. Rifiona would remain at Emerald Castle until the threat of the darkness nullified. She would leave in the morning with the Emerald Forest Army to meet with Vaerin in the Bearcliff Mountains. This is my first time entering Emerald Castle. Meeba's breathless words brought his attention to her upturned face. He observed her features a moment before steering her toward the main entrance. Welcome. It's beautiful, she replied and let go of his arm to take in the view of the hall. Have a look around while your room is prepared. She wandered to a wall of portraits and stood beneath a rendition of his father. He always had kind eyes. Rayhen joined her to gaze at the painting. He had a strong conviction of right and wrong. He never compromised his beliefs on how heir should be ruled. You are like Cecilida in that sense. From what I've seen, you take pride in your people and do not hesitate to put them first. Except when it comes to voting to take down the barriers. She turned her storm cloud grey gaze to him and folded her arms. I do not entirely see it that way. It would have been better to let down the barriers and work out the differences between kingdoms and rulers. I can also see how avoiding conflict kept your people alive. It would have been terrible if King Balthazar continued Ananias' plot to march Deseres' troops through Etruria. In a way, the barriers saved Etruria. Do you think that's why Riverfold and Xerxes betrayed Ananias and came up with the plan to separate the kingdoms? He watched her drop her arms and turn back to his father's portrait. She tilted her head back without looking at him and said, "I wish it were a noble cause that brought them to that decision. I think the truth was something more selfish. At least, that is the impression I got from Ananias when he boasted in my face." Things had to change between the 5 kingdoms. Whether it changed by battling each other or finally shifting the way all the rulers voted, Etruria couldn't remain in a constant state of disagreement. I think they wanted to avoid any involvement that would have caused all the kingdoms to change. The kings didn't have to give up any rights in isolation, and they could continue to exist however they wanted. They swept the problem under the rug and ignored everyone outside their kingdoms. The 5 kingdoms do not have a choice now. We need to work together, or the darkness will destroy us all. She reached up and ran her fingers through her curls as she continued to speak. I believe more than ever the darkness is being controlled by a being. All it took was locking my powers down from pregnancy, and the darkness separated. It can't have been that easy to get rid of something that plagued me for centuries. What I'm not understanding is how the darkness found you in the first place. She inhaled and spoke on a frustrated breath. I do not know. But I will bet you my entire kingdom's wealth that the darkness will find me again. Do you think Xerxes will keep the barriers closed? She dropped her arms again and turned to walk toward the main stairs that led to the 2nd floor. I don't have faith in most Etruscan kings, but I suppose there is always hope. She sat down on a bench near the stairs and hid a yawn behind her hand. I'm exhausted. I can take you to your room, although I'm not sure it is ready yet. I'll wait a few more minutes. As you wish. He sat down next to her as they fell into meditative silence. Chapter 10. Meba's bed rumbled and vibrated, rousing her from sleep and causing her heart to pound. She kept a few candles burning, so she wasn't in complete darkness, but the feeling of her room shaking ignited her fear. She used her power to brighten the candlelight, then searched for the source of the commotion. She heard a deep hum outside her open window as if someone were singing. Mebe swung her legs over the edge of the bed and padded to the fluttering cream silk curtains. She brushed the material aside and leaned over the sash. The half moon in the sky did not emit a lot of light, but it reflected enough she could see large figures moving in the night. She sucked in a breath as she saw giants making their way toward the castle. She couldn't make out their features or what they wore, but it was clear the giants had a body larger than trees. They had to be giants because they walked on 2 legs, their arms swinging by their sides as each foot lumbered across the green plains of air. She watched the giants approach. They moved with precision and measured pace. The impact of every footfall rattled Meba's bones as they drew nearer. The earth pulsed, each beat from the giants' feet feeling less intense as they passed the outer fortress. They traveled around the castle and faded into the night. Mebe pushed off the windowsill and stepped backward until her calves touched the bed frame. She flopped down on the edge of the mattress and stared out the window. She blinked, her bones still tingling with the aftermath of the giant's march. Her fingers felt stiff from gripping the candle holder, and her knuckles popped as she set it down on a nightstand. Her shallow breaths began to deepen, but she didn't feel sleepy. She slid under the covers and luxuriated in the mattress and soft pillows. The dim glow of the candles kept the trepidation of nighttime and the unknown from infiltrating her mind. Meeb pulled her hands up and commanded her light to shine. She couldn't access a lot of her power, but she had enough light to make her palms glow. She watched the magic glimmer in the darkness and felt conviction fill her mind. There would be no surrender to her enemies, may they be tyrants, mystical beings wielding anti-life power, or the thoughts inside her head. Meeb closed her eyes, and for once, she was not afraid to fall asleep. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Rayhen jumped up from his seat in the library as Rifiona charged into the room. He was sorting through record books with Meeb but halted when he heard the Stag King call his name. Rifiona's black eyes emitted an amber glow from their depths as Rayhen watched him approach. He glanced over to perceive Meeb put down her book and rise to hear what Rifiona had to say. "My High Commander, one of the Eagle shapeshifters, just informed me that Xerxes has opened their barriers." The words rushed from Rifiona. Rayhen watched the disturbed expression on Rifiona's face and dreaded the rest of the news. "What else did your High Commander see?" Rifiona glanced behind Rayhen to the floor-to-ceiling windows of the library. She knew the barriers were removed around Xerxes because there was a cloud of darkness that destroyed their kingdom, just like Ravenna's kingdom. All of the plants and animals disappeared, leaving nothing behind but rocks, water, and buildings. Rayhen sat down again as nausea permeated his stomach. He looked to Meeb, whose skin had paled, and her grey gaze widened. He looked to Rifiona and gulped around the tightness in his throat. "We are out of time." "Yes," the Stag King responded, and the light in his eyes continued to glow like an ember in black coals. "But that is not the problem that is most concerning." By the sun, he didn't want to hear what the Stag King had to say next. Rifiona looked to Meeb, and his features became melancholy. "Ananias II is standing at the border, and he is not alone." A whimper came from Meeb, and Rayhen turned his head to notice her hunched over, her knuckles pressed against her lips. Rayhen glanced over his shoulder to meet Rifiona's gaze again. "Who is with him?" "A female being." "Oh, Sunday." Meeb pleaded and swallowed before she spoke. "What does he want?" Rifiona knelt, so he was eye level with Meeb and said, "I do not know." Meeb's voice produced a rasping whisper. "Ananias cannot pass through the barrier around Air or Riverfold, but he can march right into Desiree. Once he gets there, he will have access to his army, his navy, and the darkness. He's at the border of Xerxes and Ravenna because he wants everyone to know he's alive and in control. He's always flaunted his power. The psychological warfare he inflicts is what makes him dangerous." "Then what the blazing sun do we do now?" Rayhen stood up, turned to the window, and stared into the distance. Meeb joined him and crossed her arms as she spoke. "We go see what he wants. There's no other option. We need to find a way to give Air and Riverfold's people time to hide." "And what about the being that wields the darkness?" Rayhen turned his head so he could gaze at Meeb. "Then there is nothing we can do unless we kill Ananias and sever his magic from the darkness." Meeb spoke, and he could hear her experience as a queen in her voice. "And if she isn't being manipulated? Ananias can't break through the barriers, and he cannot move 10,000 soldiers overnight. It will take him a week to mobilize them and another week to get them to the border of Desiree. By then, our people will be safe, and we can face him head-on." Rayhen turned around and started walking toward his stationary desk. "I'll contact Maxim." She turned her head, and the look of gratitude she gave him made his chest prickle. She straightened, and the edges of her lips tipped up. Thank you. If it takes my last breath, I will take him down with me. Chapter 11. Maxim met them at the castle. He arrived a couple of hours after a message was left with his border patrol. He used his power to travel through the ether and arrive at Emerald Castle. Maxim was dressed in a leather uniform with armored boots. Wicked, curved knives jutted from his vambraces, a sword hung low on his hips, and twin dagger holsters strapped to his thighs. His chestnut-colored hair was pulled back into a tight ponytail, making his features severe and precise. Atop his head was a silver crown, with 4 wolf heads arranged around the base. Rayhen and Meeb departed on horseback. She hated how it jostled her stomach, but she had no choice. A wagon would be suspicious and slow them down. Rifiana was in his stag form, running beside them. Maxim used his power again to teleport to the western border of air. She was close enough now that she could see Maxim waiting with his arms crossed about 10 feet from the magic wall. Ananias was waiting, just like Rifiana described, with a being appearing as black as death. Meeb got a better look at the being she came to know as the Darkness as she slowed her horse to trot toward the barrier. She was tall, about the same height as Ananias, and her lithe form stood still. There was no color contrast, and her tight-fitting gown was obsidian. Meeb could see the fabric fluttering in the breeze around the Darkness' feet, but it was difficult to make out on her body. Her hair flowed around her shoulders like black ink dropped in water. Meeba's feet touched the ground, and she stretched a moment before turning her attention to Maxim. He was glaring across the border at Ananias, who looked smug. Has Ananias said anything? Maxim gave a slight bow and returned his dark brown stare to Ananias. He's just been standing there, with that smirk. I feel like punching him in the face. A laugh burst from her throat. He has that effect on people. It's his way. He likes to play mind games and twist reality. Taunt, smirk. He's just an all-around asshole. Maxim lifted his brow at her harsh language, but the edges of his lips twitched. Even this far away, I can see the malice of his aura. The way he stands, it is like a viper waiting to strike. You would be correct in that assumption. Rayhen tugged on the bottom of his jacket and spoke to her as his hand moved to his sword. What do you suggest we do now? Meeb shivered as she met the obsidian eyes of the female on the other side of the barrier. We go speak to him. The power I feel from her is the same I felt draining my light when the darkness surrounded me. Rifiana, now a being and not a stag, crossed his arms and widened his stance. That creature, the being you are calling the darkness, makes my magic feel repulsed. It turns my very soul sour. That is how I felt every day for 3,000 years. Meeb stared at the darkness in wonder and repulsion. She was beautiful in her complete blackness, yet the power she wielded was in discord to Meeba's light. She turned back to Rayhen, Maxim, and Rifiana. Remember, his power is in manipulation. He loves attention, and spewing his evil plans makes him feel important. He's behaved that way for 1,000 years, and I don't see him changing his ways in a matter of days. I've had quite enough of toxic kings flaunting their disrespect, Rayhen growled as he flexed his claws. Rayhen's appearance changed from a mane of russet and campfire to crimson flame. His emerald and gold eyes widened until they resembled the shape of a lion. His entire vision became forest green. Rayhen's jaw expanded, and large tusks jutted from his mouth. They curved over his upper lip, and his skin looked like smooth wood. A luminescent green smoke swirled around his body. She was mesmerized by the monstrous beauty of Rayhen's alternate appearance. She watched him stroll toward the magical wall with a predator's intent. Rayfiana and Maxim flanked Meeb on either side as the three rulers followed. They stopped 3 feet from Ananias, who turned and stared right at Meeb. She clenched her fists at her sides and hated the way her skin prickled as if something grotesque crawled over her entire body. Her spine tightened, and her shoulders jerked as a chill shivered through her system. Meeb stared into the amber and gold gaze of her ex-husband and felt hatred beyond measure. "Meeb," he called, and even her name on his tongue felt like being licked by slugs. She wanted to gag at the insidious way he leered at her, but instead, she said, "What do you want, Ananias?" He tsked at her like a child. "Meeb, after all this time, I'd think you would know what I want without asking. I'm not a mind reader, Ananias. Just tell me what you want." Ananias ran the pad of his thumb over his lip and gestured to the being to his right. He waved his palm, and black clouds began to billow around her. Ananias closed his fist, and the power of darkness flowed back into her body. "This is Kiki. I believe you are familiar with her power. What I want goes back to her escape from Desiree and her reign as queen." Meeb stared at Kiki as her mind jumbled with thoughts. "Queen? Desiree had been under her rule until I became king. My father was merely a pawn, a figurehead while she sat on her throne of darkness. She lived in the desert long before we settled, and she made a deal with my father that I intended to sever. I could make her do whatever I wanted with my power, but she escaped my kingdom. She hid in the darkness where I couldn't find her, but I knew there was a queen who wielded light. Light reveals all, even darkness, and my plan to recover Kiki became more realistic. I decided to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I'd marry you and gain more territory in Etruria, find Kiki and then take over the rest of the 5 kingdoms." Meeb shouldn't have been surprised Ananias was still holding on to his obsessive plan to take over Etruria. "Look around you. You created a wasteland. How are your people going to eat? Who is going to be left for you to rule over?" Ananias waved his hand in the air. "I have plenty of beings that can wield the power of the earth. All they need is soil and water, and as you can see, there's plenty of that left." She wanted to strangle Ananias into reason. "You are insane, and I will stop you." "How? You could not defeat Kiki, and you cannot defend against 10,000 soldiers. That is where you are wrong." She stepped back and turned to the other 3 kings so Ananias could not read her lips. "Rayhen, put up a sound barrier with your air magic so he can't hear us." She felt the space around her body pressurize and sounded like a cork popping. She looked to Rayhen, and he nodded his head, which she took to mean they were safe. Meeb continued her speech. "His entire plan is based on his manipulation of Kiki's power." Rayhen bent his head toward her, lowering the volume of his voice and retracting his tusks so he could speak. "So, what are we going to do? Let him go. He can't linger in Xerxes, or he will starve. Let him take Kiki and go to Desiree. Neither of them can break through the barriers around Riverfold and Air. Even with an army, they can't get through. Keep his focus on us, that way, he won't go looking for the people in the Bearcliff Mountains. Then we go after Baltazar, try to get him on our side. If that doesn't work, then I have another thought." "And what is that other plan?" Rayhen asked as he lowered his voice yet again, so it was barely audible to her hearing. Meebas twisted her lips into a cruel smile. to siphon the darkness and his powers from their bodies. How the blazing sun are you going to do that? Maxim put a hand on Rayhen's shoulder, and his gaze directed to her stomach. How long? 4 months. How blazing long for what? Rayhen hissed at her and Maxim. I'm 4 months pregnant, and in 2 months, I will enter my siphoning cycle. I'm one of the most powerful beings in Etruria. Imagine how much power I will need to feed my baby. In 2 months, I'll be able to weaken both Ananias and the darkness. All we need is an army to take on Desiree or convince Balthazar to go against Ananias. Maxim let go of Rayhen and said, it's a risky plan, but I like it. Rayhen's hair was more lava than flame as he sputtered, I have so many questions right now, but I agree. Let him go, and we'll regroup. Meeb looked to Rifiana, and he said, I shall bring a force of reckoning the likes of which no being has ever seen. Then we walk away. Let Ananias raise his army, and we will plan. Tilde to be continued. Tilde. Terms and pronunciations. Etruria, Etruria. Etruria is a nation in the Earth's northern hemisphere. It contains 5 kingdoms, Ravenna, Xerxes, Riverfold, and Desiree. It is a patriarchal society except for Queen Meeb and the Kingdom of Ravenna. The currency of Etruria is gold or silver coins. Gold coins are equivalent to $20, large silver coins equal $10, and small silver coins are $5. Gems can be used as currency, and those who cannot afford coins or gems use the barter system. Etruscans speak the same language among the 5 kingdoms, but each kingdom has different dialects and colloquialisms. Their cultures vary, and each domain has a unique social structure within Etruria. Their clothes are cotton or silk chemise gowns or medieval oneck dresses with long sleeves. Men wear tunics, jackets, and pants, with boots. Kings and queens wear their kingdom's colors for state functions. X's coat of arms and the national colors are gold and emerald green, so their formal clothes would be emerald green and gold. It is a temperate climate, but air maintains temperatures of 50–60 degrees Fahrenheit because Rifiana's magic regulates it. Etruria has one major holiday, winter solstice. Within each kingdom, they have celebrations, but it does not extend to other countries in the world. Air celebrates harvest moon, like Halloween and Thanksgiving rolled into one. Ravenna holds the Night of the Raven Wing in the summer to honor the weavers that spin butterfly silk and make Lady of the Valley silk fabric. Riverfold celebrates a holiday called Forge Day, where they celebrate invention, drink, dance, and give out awards for mechanical arts and metal work. Xerxes has several celebrations held at their amphitheater or their arena throughout the year. Desiree pays tribute to Kiki, but that ceased after the 2nd generation of kings. Ravenna is one of the 5 kingdoms in Etruria. It is the southernmost kingdom, occupying the southern ocean coast and the Blackwood Forest. It is the 2nd smallest country. It is the only kingdom that allows females to rule without a king. Ravenna is famous for weaving silk gathered from giant butterfly worms. The Ravenna coat of arms has a raven wearing a ruby crown holding a gold sword between its claws. Their national colors are red and black, and their national gemstone is ruby. The royal court is made up of advisors, but the king and queen make decisions for the kingdom. They have a small elite army of raven shifters that also help tame the sentient Blackwood Forest. The raven shifters fled after the 1st generation of kings, leaving the kingdom defenseless. The weavers also retired, and the kingdom's income drastically receded as a result. Meeb also has the right to contend for the throne of the Aquarian Islands where her uncle rules. Air is located above Ravenna, and it is the smallest kingdom both in population and territory. It is based on Irish culture and folklore and is comprised of farmers and healers. The healers study medicine and herbs, as well as plant-based cosmetics. Air may not be wealthy, but it has the most earth magic beings in Etruria. The second generation of kings boosted their economy when Ravenna exclusively purchased their plant-based goods. Its coat of arms is a gold dragon holding an emerald four-leaf clover. The national colors are emerald and gold. Their national stone is an emerald. They share their kingdom with Rifiona, although he does not interfere with theirs politics or people. Rifiona and the Emerald Forest, Rifiona, after a piece of the sun collided with the earth, it scorched everything down to dirt, water, and fire. There was a second of total darkness, and then magic from the sun infused the earth, and Rifiona was born. He became the first being and shares Earth's magic. After his creation, the world became covered with vegetation and animals and created the Earth's element. He built a home for himself called the Emerald Forest. As Rifiona evolved, so did the Earth and his forest. There are shape-shifting animals, giants, and even pixies inside the Emerald Forest. He is one of the most powerful creatures in the world and prefers his solitude. His name means Stag King, and although he is a being, he prefers to live in his forest like a deer. His High Commander, his right-hand advisor and commander of his forces, is named Iole. She is a shape-shifting eagle. There are 5 clans of shape-shifting animals in the Emerald Forest: bears, eagles, foxes, mountain lions, and wolves. Rifiona controls the weather in air, which is why it is perpetually autumn. He prefers this temperature and loves the colors of fall. It is the only place with this scenery in the world. The Emerald Forest trees are shape-shifting giants that can also speak in a tree form. The Emerald Forest is the center of all Earth's magic and is where the spirit of the Earth can be felt and heard. Rifiona can communicate with the Earth itself and command its energy. His powers are limitless, except for Desiree, which is not part of his domain. Riverfold is the kingdom above air, and it is larger than Ravenna but smaller than Xerxes. This kingdom is known for its metalwork and inventions. They created solar-powered technology for light. They also trade this technology with the Aquarian Islands. Riverfold is the only kingdom with electricity and automatic weapons like crossbows, flaming swords, and armor designed with various gadgets. They are the Tinkers and Thinkers of Etruria. Riverfold's kings are the only ones to wield space and time magic. They taught the other kings of Etruria how to use blood magic to create invisible barriers that separated the 5 kingdoms after the second generation of kings. Their national color is navy blue and silver and their stone is sapphire. Their coat of arms is a timber wolf holding a clock in its jaws. Thule is the kingdom to the east of Riverfold and is about the size of Ravenna. King Ven, Meba's father, is from Thule. Helen, King Maxim's wife, is also from Thule. There is no relation between Ven and Helen. A different king took the throne after a rare disease killed the royal bloodline connected to Ven after he left to form Ravenna. Thule is a kingdom that specializes in metal and is the keeper of a particular sentient metal. The beings living in Thule can use iron in their blood to create anything: buildings, weapons, armor, tools, etc. King Ven is the only being born in their kingdom with the power of light, although he can also wield metal magic. Xerxes is located on the west side of Etruria. It takes up the entire west coast and is the size of Riverfold, Air, and Ravenna combined. It is the second largest country in Etruria and is known for its marine silk made from magical sea cucumbers. Its rival in the silk trade is Ravenna and their Lady of the Valley silk from butterflies. Xerxes has an amphitheatre that presents plays, orchestral concerts and holds royal celebrations. This kingdom also has an arena where it holds magical combat matches and trials for criminals. Xerxes trades in dyes. Indigo is found in their crustacean sea animals. They use plants for other dye colors. Xerxes also trade in gems and jewelry. On their western coast, the Rainbow Beach is where they find precious gems. They have been allies with Deseri since the formation of the Five Kingdoms. They specialize in telekinesis and lightning magic. Their coat of arms is a dolphin with a laurel crown and 2 lightning bolts. Their national colors are violet, purple, and green, and their stone is amethyst. Deseri is the largest kingdom in Etruria. Before the first generation of kings settled on the land, it was known as the land of the dead. When beings die, they turn to dust and float away to gather in the land of the dead, or Deseri, where they rest for eternity. The desert kingdom cannot grow anything, except near the oasis where the castle and only city is located. The country is barren in vegetation where massive spiders and snakes live in caves under the sand. Spiders larger than a hand can be found in any part of the kingdom, but their venom causes beings to hallucinate and go insane. Flesh-eating beetles crawl under the skin and eat organs of living things. There are also scorpions and sea crocodiles. The Serpentine River begins at the northernmost point of Etruria, runs through Deseri, and flows into Thule. Deseri's powers lie in snake charming, communing with the dead, wielding the ashes of the dead, and blood magic. They trade in spices, illegal herbs and substances, wine and beer, flesh trade, and pottery. Their coat of arms is a sword with 2 snakes eating each other's tails wound around the blade and a scarab beetle attached at the pommel. Their national colors are black and gold. And their stone is fire opal. Wangyong is a nation culture empire that is the size of the entire continent of Asia. It is the largest empire in the world. The emperor is a shape-shifting dragon with 7 sons made from 7 scales that fell from his body when birthed into existence. It is separated from Etruria by the Bear Cliff Mountains. There is only one path through the mountains between Deseri and the Wangyong border. The Aquarian Islands. The Aquarian Islands were formed when a piece of the sun fell off and caused a collision with the earth. Lava bubbled up from the sea and hardened to make a spiral-shaped land mass. The phoenix was the first living thing to come out of the sun's ashes, fire, and magic. He protects the sun that is trapped under a volcano called Mount Phoenix. The phoenix falls in love with a fish, they make a wish to the sun to marry, and they are made into shape-shifting beings by Tejas, a being that embodies stars, wishes, dreams, and desires. From their union, the shape-shifting dragons of the Aquarian Islands are formed. Mebe is the granddaughter of Phoenix and Fish, although she does not possess the ability to transform into a dragon. Her uncle is the king of the Aquarian Islands, and her cousin, Titan, is the crowned prince and heir to the throne. The Aquarian dragons have long serpentine bodies. All of them have aquamarine-colored scales, and most have white manes. They do not have wings, but they can fly and swim using air and water magic. They have eyelids that drop over their eyes to see while flying or swimming underwater. Their scales are impenetrable and can absorb magic when it attacks them. They can roar flames and sometimes lightning. They have 4 legs and claws and can breathe underwater with their gills. Cork, an island of healers. They are in a close relationship with the Aquarian Islands. It is rare for a being to fall ill because the magic in their bodies prevents disease. Rare cases have happened where beings become diseased or develop mental illnesses. Healers of cork are trained to handle any magical or physical problem with a being. They also cure mental illness with the help of mermaid magic. Beings. Beings are used to describe anything wielding magic that walks on two legs. They are not human, but human in appearance. Every being has magic, but it varies. Ability to control the weather, ability to fly, ability to change voices, ability to make words come to life, ability to grow things, etc. There are no beings without magic. Sun. The sun is considered a god. You may see a phrase like "what the blazing sun" to describe a feeling a being may have over a particular situation. Sun above or sun preserve me is an example of how the sun is used in a global language. Beings do not worship the sun, but they respect it as their life force and source of magic. They do not believe the sun is a being, but they believe its energy is the most powerful thing in the universe. Wielders, a term used to describe someone who can use magic. Raven shifters, a group of beings that formed with the Blackwood Forest. They can change between beings or ravens. Their magic is unique to the forest, and they are now an extinct species. Blackwood Forest, a thicket of sentient trees. They have vines that are vampiric and latch onto anything with blood. The trees have mouths with sharp teeth and red glowing eyes. They are carnivorous and swallow prey or squeeze them to death or drain blood from living things through their vines. Blackwood trees are nocturnal. They will sleep or hibernate if there is too much light. Meeb can pass through the forest or survive it because of her light power. Blackwoods have thoughts and emotions, though only the raven shifters can communicate with the trees. Blood vines, vampiric vines that are attached to blackwood trees. They have serrated teeth and can wrap around a victim like a snake. Magical walls /barriers, an invisible dome over each of the 5 kingdoms. It is activated through blood magic. The bloodline of the initial king who put them in place can open or close them. Example: King Darian put the magical barrier around Xerxes so only his bloodline could open the barrier. The barrier contains all magic and physical beings inside its dome. No being or their magic can pass through. Any being wielding space and time magic can unlock the barriers. Riverfold is the only kingdom in Etruria known for having this type of magic. The blood magic creates a magic signature that causes the dome to remain in place. Only a few drops of blood are needed to open and close the barrier. The more blood, the larger the hole made in the barrier. Riverfold's King Matthias of the 2nd generation put the barrier around Ravenna, locking Ananias and Meeb in the kingdom together. Siphoning nurse, a trained female attendant allows her power to be transferred to a newborn baby while in the womb. They do not need to touch a pregnant mother to send energy to the baby. Baby beings can suck out energy from outside the womb, from anyone or anything, absorb it into the mother's body, and then feed on the magic through the placenta. During this stage, the baby develops its magical identity. It does not take the essence of the magic from the nurses. Example: if a nurse can heal, the baby does not then have the magic ability to heal. The siphoning process can kill a mother or a nurse, so siphoning nurses are trained to keep biology and magic balanced. Siphoning cycle: this is a pregnancy term to describe the 6th month of pregnancy. It is when a baby starts to develop its magic. Usually, mothers cannot eat much, their energy is constantly drained, and they become a conduit for all magic. List of characters and their pronunciations. Rayhen, R-I-D-N, said with a long I sound. Meeb, Maeve. Maxim, Maxime. Zarius, Zirius. Ananias, Ananias. Kiki, Keket. Veyrin, Veyrin. Iola, Iala. Aeth, Ava. Cecilida, S.E. Salador. Acknowledgements. To my sister, who has always believed in my stories, who reads my duds and my successes. She's my biggest fan. My mother, who buys every book I write and loves the strange way my mind works. My father, who taught me to persevere. Seriously, thank you to my parents, who watch my children when I need to get down to business with my writing. My brother, who taught me to listen to criticism and learn to grow. He's the rock that keeps my anchor steady and my ship from sailing off into stormy waters. My husband, who I love with all my heart and can't imagine a day without him. My children, who gave me joy beyond measure. Jim Rader, fellow writer and my guide to the writing world. The Gettysburg Brigade author group has changed my entire outlook as a writer. Ariel Silling, fellow author, and indie guru. She is the voice that keeps me going even when all the others are trying to shut me down. My fanfiction writing partner taught me how to write romance. Nadia and Liz have been there through all my emotional roller coasters with this book. I needed all these people to form a writing career, and I'm grateful for all the parts they played. Thank you, everyone. May you continue to be my support, and may I, in some small way, be there for you. About the author. Mary E. Jung is the worldwide author and publisher of the Etruscan Royals and the Philadelphians series. She writes as fast as her ideas can formulate. Mary lives with her 2 sons and husband in Pennsylvania. She received her bachelor's degree in arts studies with an emphasis in arts management and opera from Shenandoah University. Mary regularly attends events, her favorite being the Right Women's Book Fest. Join Mary E. Jung's Muslings and receive exclusive offers, coupons, and book news. Join other readers of Mary E. Jung's books on Facebook. Follow Mary on Instagram. Follow Mary on BookBub. Books by Mary E. Jung. The Etruscan Royals series. Queen of Light and Ashes. The Libra Witch series. Blossom and Bone. Other works. The Socrates. Anthologies. Sanctuary. For the Love of Gettysburg. Document outline. Timeline of the royal family tree for all 5 Etruscan kingdoms. Author's note. Chapter 1. Chapter 2. Chapter 3. Chapter 4. Chapter 5. Chapter 6. Chapter 7. Chapter 8. Chapter 9. Chapter 10. Chapter 11. Terms and pronunciations. Acknowledgements. About the author. Books by Mary E. Jung.